Take your metaphors, your allegories, take your life lessons, your speculative science fiction, take all the euphemisms and any other literary devices you can think of to explain this cartoon, light them on fire until they are nothing but ashes. Then take those ashes, mix them in a sack with wood chips soaked in lighter fluid, then light that sack on fire just to be sure. Because this isn't a show about a teenager becoming an adult, learning to deal with newfound responsibilities. This isn't a warning about the dangers of humanity's dependence on technology. This is a show about a guy who turns into a car. That's it. Now buckle up, because it's about to get weird. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Turbo Teen. Turbo Teen is a 13-episode animated series that first aired in 1984 on Saturday mornings on the ABC network. The origin story is told within the first 30 seconds of the opening theme music. Brett Matthews is driving his car at night during a storm. Fate takes the wheel, lightning strikes a tree, forcing him off the road and right into a secret government research center. He literally crashes right into the building, into the beam coming out of an experimental device that merges him with his car at a molecular level. Now the two exist as one. Brett is cursed with the ability to change into a car whenever he gets hot. Unable to revert back to human form until he cools off, Brett deals with his newfound reality the only rational way possible. He and his friends and a dog join forces to fight crime and solve mysteries. Turbo Teen was a co-production of Ruby Spears Productions, Toei, and Hanho Hung Up Animation Studios. By 1984, Ruby Spears was a hit machine, having produced shows like Thundar the Barbarian, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Mr. T, and like the entire Saturday Supercade from Donkey Kong to Donkey Kong Jr., not to mention the Plastic Man comedy and adventure show, setting the precedent for a hero who could physically change into other things, including cars. Plastic Man could have been an influence. My Mother the Car could have been an influence. The Incredible Hulk was definitely an influence, as was the success of Knight Rider, which began in 1982. In fact, the opening titles and theme music have quite a bit of homage to Knight Rider. It's easy to imagine the creators sitting around wondering how you take the idea of Knight Rider a step further. Instead of Michael Knight and Kit, Michael Knight is Kit. Where do you start with the design of a guy who turns into a car? Which is more important, the guy or the car? To answer those questions, Ruby Spears tapped the talents of one of the greatest character designers of all time to bring their Ford Kafka to life. Jack Kirby blessed this Saturday morning metamorphosis with the same unequaled talents that birthed the Marvel Universe. You can draw a line from Mr. Fantastic to Galactus to Thor to Turbo Teen. It's not easy, but with enough ink and enough paper, you can draw that line. The cast included Michael Mish as Brett, T.K. Carter as his friend Alex, Pamela Hayden as his friend Patty, and the Frank Megatron Welker as Turbo Teen's arch nemesis, Dark Rider. Dark Rider, for those unfamiliar with context clues, was the bad guy. It was a mysterious big-wheeled monster truck that keeps showing up to try to entrap Brett in order to learn the secrets of his abilities. Dark Rider sounded like Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget, because Welker was not wasting a new voice on this show. I mean, a show about a guy that turns into a car when he gets hot? That must drive Brett crazy. You think you're progressive? Brett has no choice but to bundle his home and auto insurance. This guy, when this guy says, "Is it hot in here? Is it just me? Look out," because he's not flirting with you. He's about to turn into a car. See, for him, a carpool doesn't just mean ride sharing. It's driving into the water on a hot day so that he doesn't have to be turned into a car anymore. Look, the jokes write themselves, and it would be so easy to sit here and just run 8 minutes of me dunking on this show, but I ain't falling for no banana in the tailpipe. Yes, it is an absurd concept. Looking back on it now, we can mock the creative process from bumper to bumper. We can recoil at any attempt to criticize this thing with reasonable, rational questions. Does he consume fuel? Can he consume it when he's a human? If you put something in his trunk, or like leave your jacket in the back seat, where does it go when he changes back? Would that molecular beam have worked if he was driving other cars? What if he was driving another kind of vehicle, like a bicycle or a ride-on lawnmower? What if he'd been on a horse? What if he had just walked into it like regular? Would he be able to change into his clothes? Can he change into his clothes? If he's sick and runs a fever, do you call a doctor or a mechanic? Who details his car mode? But all of these questions miss the very important point of this cartoon. It's applying a very successful marketing formula to build a brand, to maintain excitement for that brand, to drive sales of a multitude of lifestyle-enhancing products, like toys.
We'll return after these messages.
I, Skeletor, have another warrior named Whiplash.
Battle Armor, He-Man, and Skeletor, Whiplash, and Buzz-Off each sold separately.
And I, He-Man, have a powerful winged warrior named Buzz-Off. So it's the Super Stinger Buzz-Off against the vicious tail of Whiplash. Ha-ha! Now, may the mightiest warrior win.
Buzz-Off and Whiplash figures from the Masters of the Universe collection. Other action figures also sold separately from Mattel.
We now return to Turbo Team.
So yeah, there weren't actually like any toys whatsoever. There was a GoBots branded monogram model kit that creepily changed from a 1982 Pontiac Firebird into a robot with a human head on top, but that's it. How GoBots? Well, you can draw a line from Hanna-Barbera, who produced GoBots, to Ruby Spears, who was founded by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, who had both been executives at Hanna-Barbera, and then Tonka, who licensed the GoBots, and Monogram is in there, and I don't know, Tonka's in there, Pontiac. It's not easy, it's not a straight line, but you can draw that line. There were a few other things, a coloring book. I thought there were a few other things. All right, there's no other things. Which proves my point. Having none of the things was the most important point of this cartoon. It was what it was, a thing of pure uninhibited indulgence of creativity and thought, intended for an audience that accepts things at face value because they do not possess the prejudice yet to concern themselves with taste or style or depth. They lived in the moment, sustained by the joy of each new thing that they were exposed to, as if it was the first time being exposed to anything because it was. The audience for Turbo Teen was as excited for a show about a guy who turns into a car the same way they were excited about seeing a dog or splashing a puddle or drinking marshmallow-saturated milk out of a bowl of cereal. This was a show for kids because kids don't ask questions about the physics of a car pogo hopping on its rear bumper. The internal logic of the show was perfectly sound enough for them. What's a metaphor? I don't know. What's a meta against? What's a meta in the first place? Bring on talking turbo boost car with dog friends, solve mysteries, fight crime. If you missed it, I hate to say that there's not much you can do to experience the purity of Turbo Teen for yourself. Not to its fullest, anyway. 5 episodes that have been found in English are available on DVD on eBay, but the other 8 appear to be lost. Episode 1, as of this video, may only be available in German. Turbo Teen is not high art. It was never intended to be, but it has become part of our modern pop culture lexicon, and for that purpose alone, it should be preserved. Turbo Teen is so obscure that you may not even realize when it's being referenced. Robot Chicken did their version, asking some of the same questions that we all have as adults in a standard skit without an ending on the Rabbits on a Roller Coaster episode. The Rotten Tomatoes show, which also was a thing at some point, ran a commercial with a not-so-subtle homage to Turbo Teen. Rick and Morty did their own version. Bender's transformation into Werecar mirrors Brett's, and even the Teen Titans Go episode, Teen Titans Vroom, reenacts the same origin story from the opening titles, changing all of the Titans into cars. We gotta act quickly. If there are tapes out there, if someone has these episodes, they need to be preserved. They belong in a museum. Even the fanfiction community at fanfiction.net/cartoon/turbo-teen is starting to lose interest. If Axe Cop became a thing for its indulgence in the chaotic stream of consciousness word association style of narrative structure, then what less do we owe Turbo Teen? What more? Everything has been done before and everything will be done again. So if you really want to tell new stories, you have to come up with new ideas. Turbo Teen is a rare example of genuinely unique stories with new characters and new situations that do not exist in any other piece of narrative art. It is a window into the willingness of the viewer to allow creators to tell whatever kind of story they want to tell without fear of meeting some arbitrary standard of sophistication. There is no modern gritty reboot of Turbo Teen coming because the adult mind no longer possesses the openness to see Turbo Teen for what it is, to unironically go along for the ride, understanding that the journey is more important than the destination, to appreciate Turbo Teen for the only thing it was ever meant to be, a show about a guy who turns into a car. Fun, fast-paced action, and impossible to create without a mountain of red tape. Two short anime films that are nearly unrivaled in their degree of influence, energy, and recognizable sci-fi character cameos per second. Like a toy box come to life or a dizzying glimpse into the minds and hearts of pop culture fans around the world, they are two of the warmest welcomes to a fan event that have ever been produced. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Daicon 3 and 4. Daicon 3 and Daicon 4 were science fiction conventions that took place in Osaka, Japan in 1981 and 1983 respectively. While I'm sure they were a blast, I'm not here to tell you that someone dressed up as steampunk Godzilla. Both conventions featured short animated films that were created to kick off the events, kind of like the opening ceremonies for the Olympics, but if there was no budget and the end product was a 5-minute cartoon. A sizzle reel to get you in the mood for talking about giant robots, superheroes, and Star Trek. An homage to all the fandoms and properties that made this event, this convention, this Taikai possible. Daicon 3's opening animation depicts a young girl being tasked with a mission to deliver a glass of water to fuel the creation of a massive spaceship. Along the way, she is challenged by mobile infantry armor, Gamora, Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Gamera, Baltan, a Star Destroyer Yamato, the Starship Enterprise, and a bunch of other recognizable characters from intellectual properties around the world, all to the tune of composer Bill Conti's Runaway off the soundtrack to James Bond, For Your Eyes Only. But that little girl is incredibly resourceful and superhumanly strong, and no one can stop her from completing her mission. She delivers that glass of water safely to a withering, sun-drenched radish half buried in the ground, at which time it turns into a spaceship that she is now a crew member of, along with two of the event's producers. 2 years later, Daicon 4 would revisit the same concept as Daicon 3's opening, but with a lot more flash, a lot more sizzle, and a lot more characters. If Daicon 3 was Marvel's multiverse of madness, Daicon 4 is Ready Player One, the book version, where you couldn't possibly iron out all of the legal red tape required to get these franchises into one film. Daicon 4's opening begins with a recreation/retelling of the events of Daicon 3's opening. The lyrics from ELO's prologue on screen. As the track plays, we gently drift through a starfield, reorienting us with the radish spaceship scene at the end of the previous short film. ELO's prologue gives way to ELO's Twilight, and then we rejoin our heroine. She's all grown up, wearing a Playboy bunny outfit, ready to once again battle the forces of science fiction, superheroes, and associated media. The rest of the film dispenses with any pretext of a clear narrative. Our heroine starts wrecking pretty much every popular science fiction character and reference that could be worked into a fight montage in 1983, which all leads to the complete destruction of all life on Earth through nuclear holocaust, triggering the upheaval of new land masses, rearranging the continents themselves. Just after all life on Earth is destroyed and the planet freezes over, a blast of energy is fired from the radish spaceship, terraforming the planet and presumably bringing back all of the pop culture characters, not the least of which is Sun Vulcan. The sun rises and we are brought back to our own reality as the Daicon 4 logo fills the screen. In 1981, the Daicon 3 science fiction convention took place in Osaka, Japan, part of a series of annual conventions named and numbered after their location and number of times it has been held in that city. Daicon is the name for conventions in Osaka, Tokon is the name for conventions in Tokyo, Meikon is the name for conventions in Nagoya, and so on. The name is a portmanteau of Dai and Kon, Dai being the kanji character that makes up part of the Japanese spelling of Osaka and by itself also happens to mean big. Kon is short for convention, and it's a pun because Daicon also happens to be a type of radish, hence the design of the spaceship. Daicon 1 was held in 1964, Daicon 2 was in 1971, and by Daicon 3 in 1981 there was already a precedent set for how the shows worked and expected attendance. There was a framework and events not unlike the conventions of today. This particular series of conventions also featured annual awards like the Seiyun Award for Best Science Fiction of the Year. It's hard to think back to the smaller scale of conventions from 40 years ago. They weren't always massive, sprawling corporate marketing orgies. In this case, they were usually held near universities because that's who the target audience was, and that's who was managing the show. Two people who helped produce Daicon 3 were Toshio Okada and Yasuhiro Takeda. Part of their responsibility for the show was to have the opening animation produced. They reached out to fellow Osaka University of the Arts students Hideaki Anno, Hiroyuki Yamaga, and Takami Akai. While they were all all young and very inexperienced, everyone did their best to utilize the talents they had while improvising the other parts. Anno had some paper animation experience, but they were going to have to learn how to do traditional cell-based animation to get close to the proper look they were going for. After visiting some professional animation studios, they attempted to expedite the process and work within a non-existent budget by using vinyl sheets instead of acetate. They punched their own paper alignment holes. It was difficult, it was not ideal, but they made it work. Weaving together a small narrative built around the radish pun-based city name, they built a film that had some tension and simultaneously allowed them to include a lot of popular characters. Characters that would have been featured at the convention. Since the film was only going to be played at the convention in a pre-internet world, it was easy to avoid any copyright claims. More importantly, Daicon 3's opening film was a valuable learning experience. Materials, processes, timing, teamwork. When the work was done, instead of going their separate ways, Okada, Takeda, Anno, Yamaga, and Akai began to plan for their next Daicon 2 years away in 1983, and attempt to up their game as both convention producers and budding animators. From here, the foundation of an animation studio began to grow. According to the website Collection DX, Toshio Okada dropped out of school in 1982 and started making his own garage model kits. He recruited Yasuhiro Takeda and opened a sci-fi store called General Products, named after Larry Niven's known space novels. At the same time, the animation production efforts were formalized under the name Daicon Film. And since the team had their own shop, they were able to sell 8mm film copies of the Daicon 3 opening and merch related to it to help fund the production of Daicon 4 and the opening animation they were going to produce. Before Daicon 4, they continued to hone their skills on various projects like a live-action Super Sentai parody called Ayukoku Sentai Dai Nippon, or Patriotic Task Force Great Japan. It was independent projects like that which continued to grow their reputation in the science fiction community.
BabelCon returns to your galaxy for the 4th time this weekend. Babel Conference 82 is a science fiction and fantasy convention at the Holiday Inn East in Grand Rapids this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There will be art, aliens, panels, films, and a costume cantina. For Star Blazers fans, there will be a Star Blazers Yamato Microcon. Find out what is new in West Michigan fandom at Babel Conference 82 at the Holiday Inn East this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
With a 2-year lead time and aspirations beyond the stars, the team were planning the opening animation for Daicon 4 to be roughly 15 minutes, 3 times as long as the one for Daicon 3. But with only 12 people working on it, that time would be significantly cut prior to the premiere. Officially calling themselves Daicon Film, Yamaga was tapped to direct, assisted by Anno and Akai as animation directors. Several professional animators joined the project. Anno and Yamaga were even invited to visit Studio Nue, the people who made Macross, who then introduced them to Artland, the other people who made Macross. All of this exposure on the strength of the Daicon 3 short film. The grind of animating even a 5-minute film by hand can take years for a dozen people. In this case, the work was done at a place the team literally called a sweatshop due to the fact that the building their studio was located in was part of a textile factory. It closed at 9 p.m., they were locked inside all night, and there was no air conditioning. Finishing on the morning of the convention, Daicon 4 premiered on August 20th, 1983. With the Daicon opening animations and a bunch of low to no budget parody films under their belt, the industry had taken notice and was already anticipating what the young talented team was going to do next. First, a full brand makeover, now calling themselves Gainax. A name inspired by the word Gaina, which means big or giant in the local dialect of the Tottori Prefecture. The X was added because it sounded good and international and cool. They arrived with a big-budget splash in 1987 called Royal Space Force: The Wings of Onea-Mise. It was the biggest budget ever for an anime film at the time, 800 million yen, or just over $5.5 million. That was more than 1986's Castle in the Sky by Hayao Miyazaki, or Castle of Cagliostro, also by Hayao Miyazaki. A critically acclaimed story of an alternate Earth-like world where a young man who dreamed of being a pilot who is seeking purpose joins the Space Force after a young religious woman convinces him that space travel may finally be the way for Earth to achieve peace, but the whole thing results in war anyway because humans are a cursed species. Box office draw wasn't proportionate to the money spent, but it further cemented Gainax as an anime force to be reckoned with. And it set them up for their next project in 1988, Gunbuster, which was a success. The opening films for Daicon 3 and 4 were unofficially released on Laserdisc in 1988. You don't have to be a copyright lawyer to recognize the problems that would exist trying to get all of those characters licensed within Japan, much less internationally. In Japan, Gainax attempted to carefully step around the legalities by giving away a Laserdisc featuring both films for free when you purchased a copy of the exclusive Daicon film art book featuring the works of Daicon film as seen in the Daicon 3 and 4 films. That Laserdisc is today very expensive. It was also released unofficially in Japan on Betamax. Fewer of those survive today given the nature of the magnetic tape and the fact that Beta lost the home video wars. Gainax also took one step toward an official release in the US. They reached out to Playboy to get clearance for the main character's outfit. When Playboy declined to give them permission, they decided it wasn't worth the effort or cost to pursue, like, anything else. Whether ELO would have given them permission to use Twilight, we will never know. Gainax went on to produce anime films and series like Nadia, Secret of the Blue Water, Furikuri, Gurren Lagann, and Neon Genesis Evangelion. Several other studios have been formed by members of Gainax: Gonzo in 1992, Kara in 2006, Trigger in 2011. Takami Akai stepped down from the board of Gainax in 2007 to run his own company called 9 Lives after the negative online fan backlash to episodes of Gurren Lagann, or rather, negative fan backlash to Akai's comments about the fans who posted their negative comments in online forums. Akai's comment was, and I want to make sure I get this correct, he said that when he personally reads these negative comments online, it is like putting his face next to an anus and breathing deeply. That's quality work right there, Akai. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Hiroyuki Yamaga went on to write and direct episodes of Gunbuster, Mobile Suit Gundam, War in the Pocket, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Furikuri. Hideki Anno has been one of the most influential anime creators in the industry and remains so today. Gunbuster, Evangelion, Cutie Honey, Giant Robo, and recent live-action movies like 2016's Shin Godzilla, 2022's Shin Ultraman, and 2023's Shin Kamen Rider. Both opening animations have been homaged or straight up used in various media productions since 1983. In 1991, Gainax produced a movie called Otaku no Video, a semi-origin story of the Gainax team and otaku or fan culture in general. The 2005 live-action series Densha Otoko, or Train Man, opens with an animated sequence that so heavily references the Daicon opening animations that it actually uses ELO's Twilight, destroys a ship that looks like the Radish spaceship, and re-terraforms the planet. In the Furikuri episode Brittle Bullet in 2000, Haruko wears a Playboy bunny suit while surfing through the air. Just before she unleashes her attack on a giant robot, she shouts, "Daicon 5." In 2014, a live-action television series, Blue Blazes, aired from July to October in Japan. It was based on an autobiographical manga series by Kazuhiko Shimamoto that depicts a fictionalized account of his time as a student at the Osaka University of the Arts. It is significant because it features characters based on and named after Hideaki Anno, Hiroyuki Yamaga, and Takami Akai, who were students at the school at the same time. Also in 2014, Gainax announced a new awareness campaign for the 33rd anniversary of the Daicon 3 opening animation. Dubbed Daicon Film 33, it was a merchandise push with new artwork by Takami Akai, the original character designer. In 2021, Daicon Film resurfaced in cooperation with someone who worked on the original film in 1981, but chose to remain anonymous. The goal was to produce a restoration of the original Daicon shorts and was announced on Twitter by Kaneko Video, who themselves had actually received a cease and desist for having previously attempted an unauthorized restoration. This time, everything was legal. Except for everything in the films, which remains totally unlegal. The last Daicon, Daicon 7, was held in 2008, but the series of sci-fi conventions has continued through today. SF60 was held in August of 2021 in Takamatsu. 2020's convention was postponed due to COVID-19 and is currently slated to be 2022's FCon in Koriyama. There have been a lot of conventions since 1983's Daicon 4, and they have continued the tradition of some kind of opening ceremony, some kind of presentation to kick off the festivities, but none of them have had the same impact as those of Daicon 3 and 4. They launched careers, they changed the industry, they won industry acclaim. In 2001, Animage magazine ranked the Daicon animations 35th out of the top 100 anime of all time. They aren't flawless, nothing is. Hiroyuki Yamaga has said that the Daicon animations are a source of pride and something you want to strangle. Takami Akai said, "I don't want to see them for a long time. Just thinking about them sends shivers down my spine." But to truly understand their importance and impact, you have to be able to cast your imagination back to what the world was like when they were made, to the people who made it and the people who it was made for. Can we turn the lights down for this? No? Great. See, This was a world before the internet, before cell phones, before YouTube and TikTok, before Return of the Jedi, before DVRs, and even before the widespread use of home video recorders. If something aired on television, if you saw a movie at the theater, you had no control over when you got to see it again. These animations were for a science fiction convention run by university students. This wasn't 130,000 people attending San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, more like 1,300. And a handful of college students dropped 2 5-minute shorts of animation that were skating the cutting edge of the genre with visual effects, style, and editing and direction, leaving the static, rigid 70s behind. Animation that was blasting its way into the future with a crossover of unimaginable scale, challenging the knowledge of the most rabid fans as the costumes and characters flash across the screen, obliterating the limits of expectations as to who or what might appear in the very next frame. A mix of Eastern and Western pop culture as the two countries were coming together in shared pop culture interests and community activities like this convention that celebrates not just the properties, but the idea of being a fan, staring at the screen, trying to catch their breath as they try to process what they were seeing, absolutely losing their minds. Forever changed by what they saw, it was a unique experience that is lost to us today. Not only that we can watch this 40-year-old piece of media, but we can re-watch it. We can freeze frame it and pick out every single character in it and compare it immediately, effortlessly, to the thousands of other creations that have been produced since. Guns are as American as apple pie, which would make it sound like they're on equal footing, but I gotta tell you, I've seen far more kids playing with toy guns than toy pies. That said, for both audiences, the more realistic the better. You want it to look real, you want it to feel real, you want it to sound so real. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Entertech. The history of toy guns in America goes back to the invention of, well, this thing. Mine's vintage. Pop culture has always had a love affair with guns because we love stories about good and evil, cops and robbers, war, alien robot fights, and there's no quicker way to introduce dramatic tension into a situation than to toss a gun into the mix. 63% of movies and television is just writers coming up with situations to have characters point guns at each other. Probably. In the 1950s, westerns were big business and kids had toy cowboy guns. In the 60s, it was all about rockets, space exploration, and lasers and atomic disintegrators, not to mention all the World War II and police replicas. The cowboy guns didn't go away, mind you. The phasers and Tommy guns and snub-nosed revolvers just got added to the selection. Plastics made it easier to produce even greater quantities with greater selection. In the 70s, the proliferation of plastic arms swelled, and with each successive decade the toy industry grew, pop culture played a larger role, and by 1985, realistic modern toy gun technology reached its apex. No, not you, Megatron. Entertech was a brand of water guns produced by LJN Toys starting in 1985, featuring a high degree of realistic design, a battery-operated rapid-firing trigger mechanism, removable cartridges, and a 30-foot effective range. Market-shifting attributes that put the previous era of clear plastic, manually operated, water-firing sidearms to shame. Realism wasn't necessarily a new thing. Companies like Nichols, Hubley, and Marks made all kinds of cap guns back in the 50s and 60s that looked and felt like the real thing, and some even featured two-piece firing caps that produced smoke from the barrel. But the realism was the selling point. Kids loved to play guns, or war, or alien robot fight, or at the very least recreate the adventures of Han Solo, Snake Eyes, or whichever gun-toting hero was the flavor of the day. I spent hours on vacation at my grandparents' house sneaking up on imaginary assailants in the bedrooms and hallways, heroically diving over couches and leaping into the kitchen. Lots of tense moments, slow-motion fighting, trying to save the last imaginary bullet because only one of us was walking away from this, and while I still had plenty of ninja stars, I was a crack shot with a sidearm. Entertech sold that realism. They looked like real guns. They were just about the size and feel of a real gun. Obviously not the same kind of weight, but when filled with water, including the batteries and firing mechanism, certainly closer to the real thing than ever. The sound, alright, maybe not so real there. No one would ever mistake it for the sound of actual gunfire, but at least it was a noise coming out of the gun when the trigger was pulled, as opposed to the wet squirt of the previous era. The first batch of Entertech guns were all based on real firearms, including a rocket-propelled grenade that unfortunately didn't fire a water balloon or anything, it just shot water out of the tip of the rocket. There was an Uzi, a Beretta, the Centerfire, the Waterhawk, and an M16. Sales took off, and in the second wave of production, LJN licensed the Rambo name and Sylvester Stallone's likeness on the strength of the first Rambo sequel, Rambo First Blood Part 2, which hit theaters in 1985, and the Rambo animated series, which aired in 1986. The Rambo guns, of course, were the same as the regular guns, they just had Rambo's name on them, and they came with a red Rambo headband. Entertech Wave 2 also introduced water balloon grenades complete with detonator-style pump to arm them, and a shotgun also with pump action, a brief glimpse into the future of water gun technology. Entertech expanded the toy gun market with the laser tag alternative called Photon in 1986. In 1987, they introduced a paintball-style game called Gotcha, which was also a Nintendo Entertainment System tie-in, and Zap-It water guns with disappearing ink. But public opinion about realistic guns marketed to children and the dangers they presented in the real world became too much to ignore. Some cities had already taken preemptive steps to ban the sale of realistic toy guns years before, and more were joining every day. Anything that even looked like a real gun had been illegal in New York City since the 1950s. As more toy guns were released into the market, more incidents of these guns being mistaken as real occurred, and the results were deadly. Entertech and other brands of realistic toy guns were being used to commit actual crimes. To address that, state and federal legislation was introduced to treat criminals who used toy guns in the commission of a crime as if they had used the actual gun. The toy gun industry made attempts to self-regulate, but those attempts were quickly made actual requirements, regulations by federal law. Toy guns of all types were required to have a blaze orange tip affixed to the end, and preferably other bright orange markings that immediately drew a visual distinction between it and the real weapon it was mimicking, and preferably maybe even don't make them at all. Just 2 years into the brand, in 1987, Entertech was attempting to move away from the realism that had put them on the map as they released some of their previous offerings in a slew of 80s neon colors. But the end was already in sight. Parents weren't buying as many toy guns, kids didn't want guns that looked like neon vomit. Not to mention that while refillable cartridges had been a revolutionary concept and added to the sense of realism and the play value, the drain on the batteries required a cash reload. And once the batteries were dead, it reduced the combat effectiveness of the weapon to 0. And in 1990, Laramie Toys introduced the Super Soaker, which solved every problem Entertech's guns had and improved on everything they were already doing well. They didn't look anything like real guns, more water capacity, greater effective firing range, way cheaper to produce with no electric or metal mechanical parts, no batteries required, no kids killed for carrying them in public, no banks robbed. After profits from LJN cratered due to the loss of Entertech sales, parent company MCA sold LJN along with the Entertech brand to Acclaim in 1990. Acclaim focused the LJN brand on video game production, ending toy manufacturing and retiring the Entertech brand. With Entertech, LJN Toys revolutionized the toy gun industry and water guns in particular. They delivered an unprecedented, unrivaled degree of realism in replica weapons intended for use as toys by kids, and in retrospect made a pretty strong case for why that was a particular area of focus that the industry no longer needed to explore. Part game, part puzzle. If you do it right, it's a functional work of engineering art. Designed with meticulous precision, disguised as chaos, it has been gleefully sold by the millions for over 60 years. An intriguing study of environmental determinism, and that goes both for the invention and the inventors. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Mousetrap. Mousetrap is a board game that was first released by Ideal Toys in 1963. It is designed for 2 to 4 players or as few as one resolute individual motivated by curiosity and a willingness to abandon the rules. Mousetrap pits players against each other in a cutthroat game of elimination, or rather, avoidance of it. A brutal narrative unfolds as participants willingly cooperate to construct an absurdly complex mechanism of detainment, which they will then take turns attempting to subject their former accomplices to. You are a community of mice building the means of your own entrapment, policing yourselves as you fight for a reward, the cheese of self-preservation at the expense of liberty for all, learning too late that even a bathtub and an old boot can be the tools of the carceral state, because in the absence of justice for all, oppression takes whatever form is available. Roll the dice, move your mouse, build the trap, take the cheese, turn the crank, capture the mouse, live another day. Mousetrap was originally created by a toy design and engineering firm called Marvin Glass & Associates. They were a company who developed concepts for toys and games that were then sold or licensed to manufacturers like Ideal, Hasbro, or Mattel. It's a lot easier than doing all the work yourself. And Marvin Glass should know he dedicated his life to toy design after a production debacle in 1949. Miniature stained glass window Christmas ornaments were not the hit he was hoping for. He lost over $1 million in production and promotion, leaving him over $300,000 in debt. He was saved by the intervention of a man named Edward Goldfarb, who had created a novelty mechanism that replicated the motion of a hen laying eggs, but in this case, the eggs are marbles. It was a meeting that set off a series of events that changed the toy industry. Glass, along with $300,000 invested by his own friends, turned the marble-laying mechanism into the Busy Biddy Chicken, then sold the concept to Topic Toys, who then sold over 14 million units, netting him $314,000 in royalties. Glass and Goldfarb teamed up again on Yakety Yak Teeth, the now classic wind-up chattering dentures novelty, which Glass sold to Fishlove & Company, who sold over 3 million units, earning Glass $84,000. Marvin Glass and the entire toy industry were benefiting from being produced at the beginning of a new era of manufacturable goods, the age of injection-molded plastics, a process that made it possible to produce durable goods cheaply, quickly, and in huge volumes, with results that were more refined, more elaborate, and more profitable. For proof, look no further than Mr. Machine, released in 1960, a complex clockwork automaton who, when properly wound, would move across the room on wheels, swinging his arms, his mouth opening and closing, bells ringing, steering in all directions. The inner workings were exposed through translucent housings, but the play didn't end there. Take it apart, reassemble it, understand the function of each piece. It was a hit for manufacturer Ideal, even becoming part of their corporate branding. Mr. Machine was designed by Marvin Glass associate Leo Kripik. While Glass was a brilliant salesman and promoter, he was not as gifted from a technical standpoint. But like Walt Disney, he surrounded himself with people who were exceptionally talented and motivated them to do their best work, so everyone could get paid. By the 1960s, Marvin Glass & Associates was one of the most successful toy design firms in existence, regularly delivering ideas that made millions for toy companies and, in turn, millions for Marvin Glass. Known for his salesmanship, his work ethic, and his unprecedented approach to security on the business side, he was just as infamous for his indulgences on the personal side. In 1970, Playboy magazine published a profile on Marvin Glass illustrating his home and personal life. Glass owned a 96-year-old renovated carriage house the article refers to as a live-in adult toy, a mansion where he would throw lavish parties for friends and business associates. Hi-fi stereo system built into a marble and glass cocktail table, a grand piano and microphone for the showbiz personalities that regularly attended his parties. Art by Picasso, Dali, and Gallo, floors made with inlaid teak, and an emperor-sized ceramic Roman tub that seats 8 with complimentary lighting system and a jacuzzi whirlpool. As the article puts it, should a sudsy frolic be in order? Playboy magazine was the only place you'd be able to see photos of what some of his parties actually looked like. In 1962, Marvin Glass had an idea for a new kind of game that was similar to, but legally distinct from, the comic strips created by Rube Goldberg, specifically the eponymous Rube Goldberg devices, which he had become famous for. Rube Goldberg, after graduating in 1904 with a degree in engineering, made a lateral career move and became a newspaper cartoonist. In 1912, he brought his engineering and cartooning together with strips that depicted absurd, unnecessarily complex machines to complete mundane tasks like using a napkin, opening a bottle of beer, eating asparagus. They were a critique of how overly complex modern life was becoming, how difficult we sometimes make it to solve simple problems, how advertisers will invent a crisis, then sell you the solution, how there are incredible inventions to address the big problems in life, but nothing to soothe the incidental woes of everyday existence. Where is the device to dry my toothbrush when I am done brushing my teeth? Marvin Glass proposed an idea to his designers, a three-dimensional board game that functioned like a Rube Goldberg device. Gordon Barlow, a relative newcomer to the company, stepped up to take the job, but after working on it, he became disheartened by the complexity of the engineering. Rube Goldberg's devices weren't real. They didn't actually have to function. This one did, and it needed to be reproducible both in terms of cost-effective manufacturing and by kids aged 6 and up as they played with it. Time is money, and he wasn't going to be personally responsible for delivering a failure. But he was encouraged to continue by Burt Meyer, another designer at Marvin Glass and one of the managing partners. This was something that had never even been attempted before. It was breaking the conventions of board games in general. To this point, the industry had been dominated by games like Monopoly, Stratego, Go to the Head of the Class, Clue, Candyland, Risk, and like 100 different versions of chess. Mousetrap Game, as it was originally called, was ready to go for the 1963 Toy Fair. One of Marvin Glass's first stops was Milton Bradley, the company with a roster of Hall of Fame games like Stratego, Candyland, Yahtzee, Huckleberry Hound, Tiddlywinks Tennis. They were coming off a year where they introduced both Aggravation and Password. James Shea, the president of Milton Bradley, when presented with the assemblage of parts on the game board, legit scoffed, saying, quote, "This is not a game. This is nothing. A game, you play it on a board and you roll dice, but this is a lot of plastic junk. We can't use this." Glass and Meyer were caught off guard by the reaction. They knew what they had presented was different, but they saw it as revolutionary. Not playing like a normal game they thought was the selling point. That said, in Milton Bradley's defense, Parker Brothers passed on it as well. Pass. Because Mousetrap wasn't really a game yet. It was still an idea visualized, but not realized. Glass was going to need someone else who could see the concept, someone who could complete the puzzle. In the end, their ideal business partner was ideal.
This is Mousetrap, a game in which building the trap is half the fun. You roll the dice, move your mice, build the trap. But could this thing really catch a mouse? Let's watch. Mousetrap! The Mousetrap game. It's from Ideal.
Ideal Toys opened for business in 1903 when they invented the teddy bear. Through the 40s, they saw their value rise from $2 to $11 million. In the 50s, they expanded their operations internationally. After the successful collaboration with Marvin Glass and Associates on Mr. Machine in 1960, they followed it up with Robot Commando in 1961, Bop the Beetle, King Zor, and Gaylord in 1962. By Toy Fair 1963, they were looking for another hit. They were looking for Marvin Glass. Ideal Toys bought Mousetrap and gave it to their designer, Harvey Hank Kramer, who was able to see the final vision of Mousetrap. Hank has been described as, quote, a toy designer who didn't like children, including his own. In a 2004 Denver Post article, his daughter Wendy remembers tiptoeing around in pajamas, awed by but trying not to aggravate the hard-drinking men who gathered with her father to play toss-across in the living room. Toss-across, of course, one of the many games he invented, including Score 4, Hands Down, Kaboom, and Kerplunk. He was also the guy that sculpted the Ford Mustang horse logo and created Mr. Clean. Hank was able to bring his unique insight, some call it genius, to Mousetrap to create a playable game around the assemblage of plastic components. It's his version of the game that got it into stores. All it needed was a little less revolution, a little more convention. Kramer incorporated the familiar components of other popular board games, rolling dice to determine your mice movement, a deliberate order and spaces that prompt players to build the trap in the center of the board, a singular path to the end of the game, and then the final loop as mice flirt with capture or freedom. Mousetrap was exactly the big hit Ideal was looking for. I would say it sold like hotcakes, but to be honest, Mousetrap had a better year. Hotcakes sold like hotcakes. Mousetrap sold like Mousetrap. And that kind of success attracts attention, especially from the guy you got your idea from. At 80 years old, Rube Goldberg wasn't going to just sit there and watch someone make bank off Rube Goldberg devices without Rube Goldberg getting a piece of that cheese. He reached out to Marvin Glass to see if there was any way to at least put his name on the box as an inspiration. Despite their concession that they had absolutely been influenced by Goldberg's comics, Glass's lawyers aggressively rebuffed all advances. Glass wasn't interested in sharing. Furthermore, in 1964 and 1965, Glass and Ideal would introduce two more games, Crazy Clock and Fishbait, that were just as evocative of Goldberg devices as Mousetrap. Goldberg would ultimately license his name and some of his own designs to a company called Model Products, who produced model kits with Rube Goldberg branding. Rube Goldberg's animated hobby kits hit in 1965, but lacked any sort of gaming element, and if anything, had already been beaten to market by Mousetrap 2 years earlier. 2 years later, in 1967, Mousetrap was officially granted a US patent. Mousetrap got a refresh in 1975 by Sid Saxon. Cheese tokens were added to the game, allowing for an additional element of strategy. Marvin Glass passed away in 1974. Despite the loss of the sole owner and driving force behind the company, the other managers and associates carried on. Glass himself was succeeded by his management partners, including Anson Isaacson and Joseph Callan. Mousetrap continued to be a hit for Ideal, but not all designs were so lucky. Every year there were concepts that cost tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop that would never make it to market. The pressure to deliver results, to earn bonuses, was real. Staff was frequently expected to work long hours, and the degree of security that Glass had implemented at the facility, whether real or for show, increased pressure on the designers. An environment of stress, of exhaustion, in some cases of paranoia, permeated the office. In 1976, Al Keller, a designer who had been working for Marvin Glass since 1972, arrived at the office and shot 5 people, killing Anson Isaacson, Joseph Callan, and another employee, Kathy Dunn, wounding 2 others before killing himself. The police established no motive, but did note that Keller had the names of 14 persons he planned to kill written on notes tucked into his socks. Keller allegedly believed that he was in a kill or be killed situation, thinking he was being followed, invisible spies lurking everywhere, attempting to steal ideas, working in a constant state of paranoia, which he denied was the case, but ultimately succumbed to. For the next decade, Marvin Glass and Associates continued to design toys. They even stepped into the arcade world in the early 80s with Domino Man, Tapper, and Timber. In 1985, they released Rocks and Bugs and Things, which was their final collaboration with Ideal Toys. Because in 1987, Ideal Toys was sold by CBS Toys to Viewmaster International. As part of the sale of Ideal Toys to Viewmaster, the international assets were purchased by Hasbro, as were the individual rights to Mousetrap and Kerplunk. In 1988, Marvin Glass and Associates dissolved as 3 partners and 2 designers formed their own company called Big Monster Toys. Mousetrap has been a staple of the board game industry for nearly 60 years. It has bridged generations of children to grandchildren. It has received regular cosmetic updates to keep it looking new and exciting as design aesthetics change. And it has even bled into other media. In 1990, a British Saturday morning kids show called Motormouth featured a segment based on Mousetrap, but in this case, it was scaled up to life size with kids replacing the mice. No, the kids themselves wouldn't be caught in the trap, rather the prizes they were trying to win would be if they didn't successfully complete the Double Dare style physical challenges in time. In 2004, an advanced version of Mousetrap with 3 different mousetraps was released in the UK. Different board, different trap construction, and a trap trigger that can activate randomly. In 2005, an aspiring engineer and performance artist named Mark Perez created his own life-size version of the Mousetrap mechanism. Having been obsessed with the game and its construction since he was a kid, he wanted to bring that excitement for physics and engineering to kids all over the world, to inspire them to plant the seeds of curiosity. Mark Perez's life-size Mousetrap is now a traveling performance art show that, thanks to fans and crowdfunding sources like Kickstarter, has gone from Detroit to New York to Michigan to Florida. According to their website, the goal is to create a team of artists, funders, and educators who think the words education and imagination should be the same idea. Hasbro modified the game for a new generation, changing the objective from last mouse standing to first one to reassemble a block of cheese. Assembling the Rube Goldberg device is no longer part of the gameplay. Your parents put it together before you even start playing. It is now activated by a pullback stop sign instead of a crank. Getting trapped means sacrificing a piece of cheese, putting you one step further away from winning the game. You can still get both versions depending on how you want to play. You can even get a version themed to the Elephant and Friends universe from 2014. Hasbro introduced a version of Mousetrap as part of their You Build line of games. Think Lego meets board games, really pushing the idea of building the trap. It's almost parody. It is practically art, the degree to which Hasbro has pushed the idea of convoluted complexity over gameplay that inspired Mousetrap in the first place. From a review on geekyhobbies.com, You Build Mousetrap has some interesting ideas that ultimately don't work, which leads to a broken game that has nothing to do with the original Mousetrap. Mousetrap is going to take us into the future, or rather, prolong our current entertainment media limbo with a new reality TV game show. Produced by Hasbro's E1 Media Production Division in cooperation with Fox, it is being described as a physical, non-scripted format based on Hasbro's classic board game, Mousetrap. From a Deadline.com article published in July of this year, 2021, the series will pit contestants against one another as they navigate larger-than-life obstacles recreated from the game. Through a series of demanding challenges requiring the utmost physical and mental endurance, each episode will culminate with its final round, with the last players standing working together to steal as much cheese as possible, while risking capture by the iconic Mousetrap. The more they steal, the more money they'll win. I don't know, 2022 probably, who cares? According to Wikipedia, actual mousetraps are the most frequently invented device in US history, with a total of 4,400 patents issued by the US Patent Office and thousands more applicants that were denied. You can blame Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is credited as having said, "Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door." Whether he meant that literally or figuratively is up for debate, but it's hard to argue that anyone has ever built a more entertaining mousetrap than Marvin Glass, his associates, and Ideal Toys. It's an action figure line that left a deep impression on those who owned it. Its power was in the connections it made, both literally through its engineering and metaphorically as a facilitator of imagination. It is more widely beloved than recognized, because remembering the line is one thing, remembering its name is another. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of ManTech. ManTech is an action figure line that... Hello?
Hey, maybe you can help me. When I was a kid, there was a toy that I had where you could take the weapons and stuff off and switch them around. There was a blue guy and a green guy. Does that sound familiar?
Sounds like Kenner's Centurions.
No, it's not Centurions, but it was just like Centurions. You could switch the arms and legs around and everything.
Ah, it's ManTech.
ManTech?
Yeah, ManTech. Google it and you'll see.
Oh yeah, it was ManTech. Thanks.
You're welcome. It's always ManTech. ManTech is an action figure line created by Remco and released in 1984. Calling it an interchangeable system of robot warriors was more accurate than Remco may have intended, as many of the people who grew up with it confused it with other toy lines. Perhaps an inconsequential system of robot warriors would have been more appropriate. Deep in a galaxy far, far away, the planet Mecha has been ravaged by 1,000 years of war. A once advanced civilization is now memorialized by the remnants of its technology amidst the savage wastelands. A few months ago, Jackson Good and Tyrannic were on a routine archaeological expedition when they accidentally discovered an ancient tomb of robots, a rare opportunity to regain the lost knowledge of robots, how to make them, what to use them for, everything but how to turn them off. When the two scientists entered the ancient tomb, an old computer booted up and beamed its long-forgotten secrets directly into their heads, prompting both men to spontaneously formulate hot takes about the future of humanity and technology. Jackson Good, with his long, wavy blonde hair, proclaimed that robotics was the next stage of evolution. Humans merged with robots, feeling as well as thinking, a sense of morality, of creation, and the shared greater good. Tyrannic, with his receding hairline, pointy eyebrows, and facial hair, declared that Jackson's idea of robots sounded weak, bro. Obviously, unliving robots would be stronger, and to prove it, he was going to immediately construct an army to rebuild the war-torn planet and then rule over it as a king. His evil servants are Negatech, Doomtech, and Terrortech, each 100% robotic, programmed to inflict pain and inspire fear, coded with a hatred for all living things. Their circuits burn as if powered by white-hot resentment of their own activation. Jackson Good assumed the knowledge ray had driven Tyrannic insane. Suddenly alone, he ventured deeper into the tomb where he found a ship from Earth that presumably crashed on Mecha a long time ago. The three pilots, still inside, kept alive in cryosleep. However, Jackson Good realizes they are suffering from rapid cellular degeneration that cannot be stopped or reversed. The only way he can save them is to build them new robotic bodies. Commander Cliffstone, an Aquanaut astronaut, became the subsurface diver Aquatech. Colonel Solomon's son, who won a presidential citation for quelling the Jovian colonial revolt and a Nobel Peace Prize for solar research, became Solartech. And Lieutenant Laser Ray Larson, no relation, the laser and communication beam specialist, the pilot of the ill-fated ship, became Lasertech. Despite their horror at being turned into half-human freaks against their will, the three Earthlings agree to help Jackson Good fight back against Tyrannic and his army of evil, unfeeling robots. The fate of Mecha and the universe is in the hands of the ManTechs. Hello?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of this toy line that had these guys in armor that you could switch their guns around.
It's probably ManTech.
ManTech. I haven't heard that name in years. Thank you.
You're welcome. ManTech is a series of 6 good and evil robot warriors, each complete with 15 interchangeable parts, weapons, and accessories. With seemingly infinite combinations, the number of different characters you can create is limited only by your imagination. Well, technically, there is a limit to the number of characters you can make, given that there is a finite number of pieces. Over 1 million potential combinations. If you purchase all 6 figures, it'll keep you busy for a while. The magic is in the 6mm Pause-A-Click system, a unique locking device that allows the interchangeable parts to stay in place in any position. You can easily remove one part and replace it with another. Those figures were supported with 2 different 3-in-1 land, sea, air vehicles, the Traxxon for the good guys and the Terrorizer for the bad guys. And you could play out incredible battle scenes at the Battle Station Laser 2 playset.
I have just 30 seconds to show you how the interchangeable ManTech robot warriors interchange. 30 seconds to show you more than 1 million different combinations. Solartech's head on Lasertech, or Negatech's legs on Terratech's body. But 1 million combinations? Impossible. It would take 10 days. Every part of every ManTech figure can be attached to every other ManTech figure to make wild new creations. There are 6 ManTech robot warriors, each sold separately. This figure isn't sold. I created it. Imagine what you can create. ManTech from Remco.
Remco was a toy company founded in New York City in 1949 by Isaac Ike Heller, a former U.S. Navy electronics technician and toy designer, along with his cousin Saul Robbins. They got into the toy business by purchasing literal tons of surplus military materials and turning them into toys. The name Remco is a portmanteau of the words remote and control. Their slogan was initially "Every boy wants a Remco toy," but over the years they added "and so do girls," until they declared bankruptcy and closed their doors in 1971. In 1974, Remco was acquired by another toy company called Azrak Hamway. Azrak Hamway, a portmanteau of Azrak Hamway, continued to use the Remco branding and in 1975 continued licensing pop culture properties. Toys from Star Trek, Spider-Man, Hulk, Kiss, Mickey Mouse, and Universal Monsters would all hit shelves between 1975 and 1981. In 1982, Remco released figures for World of Warlord and Sergeant Rock, licensed from DC Comics. In 1983, they followed that with Crystar, licensed from Marvel Comics. That said, they still had a lot of ground to make up in order to compete with companies like Kenner, Hasbro, and Mattel. In 1984, Remco's Conan, Zybots, and Mighty Crusaders would do absolutely nothing to help in any way. But Remco was aware that the boys' toy industry was all about action figures and had been since 1977's Star Wars supercharged the market. G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, and Transformers had all helped reinforce that idea, as well as central themes of science fiction, cyborgs, robots, and war-ravaged planets deep in space. ManTech wasn't able to follow the established formula for success in the 80s. Although an animated series was teased by Hanna-Barbera in promotional materials, none ever manifested. Instead, ManTech utilized a pack-in mini-comic to help tell the story and establish the play pattern. A story that would be expanded on in a series of 4 regular-sized bi-monthly comic books published by Archie Comics, beginning in September of 1984, ending in May of 1985. Featuring the work of Hall of Fame artists like Dick Ayers and Chick Stone, it feels like a science fiction comic from an era long before He-Man, Optimus Prime, or Cobra Commander. Hello? Yeah, ManTech. It's ManTech. Ah, it's ManTech. Yeah. Yeah, it's ManTech. Yeah, it's ManTech. Oh yeah, no, it's ManTech. Probably ManTech. Oh, it's definitely ManTech. Yeah, it's ManTech. Yeah, it's ManTech. It's ManTech. It's ManTech. Yeah, no, ManTech. Yeah, ManTech. Hello, it's ManTech. Yeah, it's ManTech. No, I know, it's ManTech. Oh, yeah, no, it's ManTech. Yeah. Yeah. It's ManTech. That's a shitload of ManTech. It's ManTech. ManTech? Yeah, ManTech. Oh, you've got a ManTech on your hands. It's ManTech. ManTech toys were sold around the world. CBS Toys distributed them in France, Gig in Italy, and there was some officially licensed merchandise like Halloween costumes and coloring books. Had the line seen a nominal amount of success on the shelves, the line likely would have been continued with another wave of at least 3 figures. ManTech is forgettable, but they haven't been forgotten. They were parodied on Robot Chicken, and they still have a loyal fan base. Thanks to the emergence of affordable 3D printers, independent toy designers have taken the initiative to carry on the legacy of ManTech's blocky aesthetic and their interchangeability, making new ManTech toys of their own. ManTech wasn't the first line of figures to center itself on interchangeable parts, and it wasn't the last. Micronauts before it, Centurions after it. Heck, nearly every kid who owned them was taking apart their G.I. Joes and Masters of the Universe and swapping limbs. ManTech was released to an oversaturated toy market at a time where the only way to get noticed was with a television show, comics, video games, cereal, bed sheets, a comprehensive cross-media campaign that never let go of a potential customer's attention. How could it compete with Centurions, who had a similar gimmick but also a daily cartoon? How could it possibly stand out on shelves stocked with Star Wars, He-Man, G.I. Joe, GoBots, Transformers, DC Superpowers, Marvel's Secret Wars, Voltron Mask, and all the other things vying for a kid's attention and their parents' dollars? Today, the dream of ManTech is alive in action figure lines across the spectrum of price points, from Boss Fight Studios' highly articulated character kit system to Marauder Gunrunner's Marauder Task Force, from Four Horsemen's Mythic Legions to Mattel's Masters of the Universe origins. Hasbro's Transformers has characters built entirely out of interchangeable parts that can be attached to other characters or used to build unique characters of your own. Onell's Glio system has enabled a range of toy designers to incorporate customizability into and across their various lines. Encouraging kids and collectors to do more and be creative with their figures has become increasingly common, a value add to already desirable toys. ManTech's substance is a relic of a bygone era, its mythology barely embraced by the people who loved the toys. But its ideas about the future of toys, built on swappable parts and seemingly infinite customization, are today an indispensable feature of the toys and collectibles marketplace. It's ManTech. It's always ManTech. Mactonite is a chimeric corporate figurehead that inhabits another space just above the city, formed in the image of Max Headroom, Bobby Darin, and a waning wheel of cheese that you must deal with. Not the hero we wanted, but the hero we needed. His siren song beckoned everyone to eat hamburgers at night because people forgot they could eat hamburgers at night. This is America, after all. Hamburgers aren't just for breakfast and lunch. Those who haven't left their homes in the last 80 years, McDonald's is one of the largest, most popular fast food franchises whose origin dates back to the 1940s. Restaurants can be found all over the United States and in nearly every country around the world. They have sold hundreds of billions of hamburgers. Industry innovators since the beginning, they introduced the Filet-O-Fish in 1962 and Ronald McDonald in 1963. Ronald was co-created by McDonald's franchisee Oscar Goldstein and former Bozo the Clown actor Willard Scott. Goldstein also owned the advertising agency that produced the first commercials featuring Ronald in his trash aesthetic. After a marketing makeover in 1966, Ronald was embraced as the face of the franchise. In the decades that followed, McDonald's introduced Ronald's homeworld of McDonaldland and several other mascot characters like Grimace, Birdie, the Fry Guys, and Hamburglar. The mascots served as marketing champions of specific food items and established a fun family environment that appealed to kids who inevitably brought their entire families in for hamburgers. That said, Mayor McCheese, Officer Big Mac, the concept of McDonaldland itself landed McDonald's in hot water in 1973 after Sid and Marty Krofft claimed that all those burger clowns infringed on their original intellectual property, specifically their right to monopolize the market on live-action cartoon monsters with giant heads. In 1985, the burger wars were approaching a climax, resources dwindled, and every participant took casualties. McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's spent the most money and deployed the largest forces, while regional skirmishes swept up smaller chains that hoped to simply weather the meat storm.
It certainly is a big bun.
It's a very big bun.
Big, fluffy bun.
It's a very big, fluffy bun.
Where's the beef?
Wendy's Where's the Beef campaign of 1984 profitably established a meaningful difference in the mind and stomach of the casual hamburger consumer. Wendy's single had more beef than McDonald's Big Mac and Burger King's Whopper, especially when you consider how big their buns were. McDonald's national marketing strategy consisted of autonomous regional marketing firms supported by a larger corporate strategy where and when necessary. If an idea worked on a local level, it could be tested and rolled out to the rest of the country. To counter Wendy's beef, the Southern California regional marketing firm Davis, Johnson, Mogul, and Colombado, DJMC, based in Los Angeles, focused on the biggest hole in McDonald's sales: dinner. Data showed that sales dropped off sharply after lunch, and clearly people needed a reminder, nay permission, to eat McDonald's 3 times a day. Brad Ball started working for DJMC in the 70s. By 1985, he'd been through dozens of marketing campaigns for McDonald's, and as such, new ideas were never far from his mind. It occurred to him one day that the song Mac the Knife could easily be changed to Mac Tonight and sloganized to promote McDonald's for dinner. Mac the Knife was originally written for the 1928 German stage drama, The Threepenny Opera. Mac, short for Mac Heath, is the main character, and the original song introduces him to the audience with a list of his crimes, from theft to murder to arson and more. DJMC acquired the rights to the original Threepenny Opera song, and then it was up to Ball to find the right recipe for a campaign theme. By 1985, Mac the Knife had been covered by Ella Fitzgerald, Bing Crosby, Liberace, and a buffet of others. The song was first popularized in the US thanks to an updated translation of the original German lyrics in 1954, subsequently covered by Louis Armstrong in 1955, but most people know it from the 1959 Bobby Darin cover that hit #1, sold 2 million albums, and helped him win Record of the Year and Best New Artist at the Grammys in 1960. Ball came up with the new lyrics along with DJMC associates Pete Katroulis and Jim Benedict that incorporated a previous McDonald's slogan, "It's a good time for a great taste." DJMC wanted to appeal to a cool new generation of hamburger lovers while maintaining a connection to what came before. According to Ball, they initially conceived the campaign as a song by itself, but realized that it didn't pack enough pickles. People needed something more to sink their teeth into. As he told the New York Times in 1987, quote, "In the end, we decided to keep it a little whimsical and fantasy-like." They didn't need to look any further than their own televisions and billboards around town for inspiration. Another marketing firm was in the process of reaching out to that same hip young demographic with a futuristic computer-generated character named Max Headroom.
Coca-Cola is ready to launch a nationwide advertising blitz, and the company already has sent its bottlers a video pep rally in the War of the Colas.
So let's let her rip. Let's land on the beaches and go all the way.
The introduction of New Coke in 1985 was a near-fatal misstep by Coca-Cola in the heart of their own cola wars with Pepsi. The New Coke reformulation was almost immediately buried by the consumer-demanded return of the original, newly rebranded classic recipe just a few months later. In 1986, Coca-Cola recruited Max Headroom to be the face of the brand and tap into the MTV generation. Max Headroom ads struck a distinct preferred personality difference between Coke and Pepsi products, regardless of any previous data supporting consumer taste preference. Ball and the rest of DJMC saw in Max what they wanted to bring to McDonald's, a cult character with a dedicated fan following that reached beyond the substance of the product in question. Since the promotion was all about McDonald's After Dark, Katroulis and Benedict pitched the idea of a character with a head that was not only moon-shaped, but actually a moon. Like Max Headroom before, sunglasses made it cool. They were so convinced that a new McDonald's mascot character was the way to go that they actually turned down offers from actual human the Frank Sinatra to sing the song in commercials. Frank Sinatra, who had just released his own cover of Mac the Knife in 1984.
When the clock strikes 6:30, babe, time to head for golden lights. Hey, it's a good time for the great taste dinner at McDonald's. It's Mac tonight. Come on, make it Mac tonight.
DJMC contracted Rhythm and Hughes Studios to produce the first commercial based on storyboards from Katroulis and Benedict. From there, they hired special effects veteran Steve Neal to create the physical suit for their new character. Neal brought his experience on movies like 1980's Battle Beyond the Stars, 1984's Ghostbusters, 1985's Fright Night, and The Stuff. Coincidentally, he had also recently worked with an aspiring young actor named Doug Jones, of whom he had already sculpted a full-head life mask for an alien costume. Jones was called in to audition based on Neal's recommendation. As Jones told the story to Mel magazine in 2022, quote, "I was told it was for a nightclub singer. I was like 26 at the time, and I didn't really fit that Frank Sinatra type, but I went to the audition anyway. When I got there, there were guys like that, gray-haired, Italian-looking guys in tuxedos, and I thought, I'm never gonna get this. But then on the walls I saw the storyboards for the commercial and I saw this big moon head and I said to myself, oh, that's why I'm here. The full head moon mask with remote-controlled articulated facial expressions weighed 10 pounds and limited Jones's vision to moments when the mouth was open. Working in tandem with 3 puppeteers, Jones developed the physical characterization for Mac guided by the director's feedback, who encouraged Jones to be even more exaggerated with his movements. The Mac Tonight arrangement of Mac the Knife was composed by Mark Vieja and Jay Kennedy of Lanny Music. Mac's singing voice was provided by Brock Walsh, a singer who frequently worked with Lanny. Mac Tonight spots began airing in Southern California in December of 1986, and the immediate impact was undeniable. Dinner sales saw an increase of roughly 10%, which, according to Contrulis, was more than enough to get the attention of the larger corporate marketing office. There was some initial concern that Mac's popularity in Southern California was a regional phenomenon. Things that succeed in LA don't always resonate with the folks in Duluth, Topeka, Sheboygan, or, I don't know, Manchester, New Hampshire. These concerns were assuaged by a corporate presentation at a marketing conference attended by franchisees in February of 1987. Those in attendance welcomed the Mac Tonight campaign with great enthusiasm. They recognized not only the immediate value to sales, but the value to overall brand recognition and association with being different in a cool way. Cool. I said it like that. Cool. Mac Tonight was a big deal for McDonald's, and as such, McDonald's corporate offices took over after the initial series of ads. For better or worse, the campaign persisted year after year thanks to its success around the country and the substantial amount of money that could be invested at the corporate level. The Mac Tonight campaign wasn't limited to television spots. Mac also did fully sanctioned live appearances, with additional actors trained to embody the late lunch lounge singer. One location in Florida registered over 1,000 attendees, hoping for a chance to meet the coolest man of the moon. Mac's co-creator Contrulis felt like that was when Mac lost his edge, saying to Mel magazine in 2022, quote, "To me it was never quite the same when the national agency took it over. I just don't think they were as interesting or creative. I don't know that they understood who Mac was and how to take him further." In October of 1989, nearly 3 years after McDonald's introduced Mac Tonight, Bobby Darin's son, Dodd Darin, sued McDonald's, claiming that Mac Tonight infringed on his late father's voice and gestures. The lawsuit sought $10 million in damages on behalf of Dodd Darin and the Bobby Darin Testamentary Trust. Co-creator Contrulis maintained that while one could make the argument that there were similarities, those similarities were not unique to Bobby Darin. You could just as easily say Mac was an homage to Frank Sinatra, or Dean Martin, or any number of popular crooners throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Besides, they had properly acquired the rights to the original song that predated Bobby Darin's version by 30 years. Singer Brock Walsh insisted that his characterization was modeled after Louis Armstrong, Frank Sinatra, and Ray Charles. Ultimately, the details didn't really matter. It all came down to McDonald's willingness to fight the claim at a corporate level.
It's Mac Tonight at McDonald's. Hit it! For food, folks and fun. I love when it's my night to cook.
McDonald's chose instead to settle it out of court and make some adjustments to the campaign, including composing a new original song. From their perspective, the campaign had already run its course. Mac Tonight ended his first world tour in 1990. Mac Tonight succeeded in ways that were likely unexpected to the original creators. His popularity spawned its own mini economy of licensed merchandise, including Happy Meal premiums, coffee mugs, sunglasses, PVC figures, puppets, plush dolls, towels, magnets, collector pins, postcards, and even watches. And while it may not technically be merchandise, in the 1990s at the tail end of the original campaign, several locations were outfitted with life-size animatronic Mac Tonight characters, complete with a piano for him to perform his magic, and occasionally a backing trio of singing chickens. Built by Manatron, it harkened back to the golden age of Chuck E. Cheese and an era of food paired with unnerving robotic stage shows. Most surviving samples are likely in private collections, if they exist at all. However, one Mac could still be found at world's largest entertainment McDonald's, aka Epic MD in Orlando, Florida, as recently as 2023 based on a quick search of Twitter and YouTube. Mac made sporadic appearances in various international markets through 1997. 10 years later, in 2007, Mac Tonight returned as a fully CG creation in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and countries throughout Southeast Asia to once again herald McDonald's as a dinner dining spot. Like the original campaign, this one ran its course after 3 years, ending in 2010. He was back in the US in 2013 to briefly promote McDonald's now even later tonight, After Midnight menu. Since then, Mac has been unceremoniously retired because there is nothing too innocuous that it can't be tainted by the stench of assholes on the internet. Sometime around 2007, an unspecified collection of hateful losers with literally nothing better to do with their time began using Mac Tonight in racist memes. Despite having the wealth of humanity's accumulated knowledge at their fingertips, these flaccid fart factories chose to indulge in the worst kinds of malicious self-expression. Lack of exposure caused it to temporarily subside, but it returned with a vengeance around 2015 when it found willing accomplices in multiple racist and misogynistic hate campaigns that end in the word gate. Known as Moon Man, he was officially added to the Anti-Defamation League's list of hate symbols in 2019. If this is news to you, take heart. It means that you may actually be spending your time on the internet in a constructive way, or at the very least, you're just not a f***ing asshole. Today, Mac Tonight is beloved by generations of fans for exactly what he was, an example of extreme experimental marketing that embodies all the weirdness of the era, from hamburgers and non-ironically cool Ray-Ban sunglasses to benevolently creepy live-action food mascots. A dedicated fan base continues to incorporate his image and his message into animation, fan art, and their own bespoke merchandise. He's featured in the unofficial Five Nights at Freddy's parody game Five Nights with Mac Tonight. It's possible he's even more recognizable today due to his association with vaporwave artist Saint Pepsi. Just hit up the Mac Tonight subreddit to see him perpetuate the synthwave aesthetic and how closely tied together the two are now. He's crossing streams that weren't even invented when he made his debut nearly 40 years ago. And it's these artists and creators that are standing tall against any hateful misappropriation of Mac's identity and his legacy, a testament to the love and care that everyone involved with his creation put into their work, to the pride that they still feel looking back on the campaign and its pop culture impact. For now, Mac Tonight doesn't have a home in McDonald land. It's possible he might never return. But as long as the moon shines in the night sky, he'll always be there to remind us that any time is a good time for the great taste of McDonald's hamburgers. They were the first to use the name, first to use the concept, first to deliver live action and animated versions, first to deliver toys, and they were the first to package all of that together with hardcore porn. Who you gonna call? Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is a 1986 animated series produced by Filmation, not to be confused with the 1986 animated series produced by Daicon. Both are about bustin' ghosts. Both were put into production due to the success of the 1984 movie, but only one of them is the real Ghostbusters. It's a generational passing of the torch as Eddie Spencer and Jake Kong hand off their paranormal investigative business to their sons, Eddie Spencer Jr. and Jake Kong Jr., along with Tracy, the hyper-intelligent gorilla, and all of the incredible inventions he has developed to find and dematerialize ghosts. The business also comes with a spooky old house in the city called Ghost Command and all of the fabulous secret powers that it contains. It's got spectral appliances like the Ansabone, Skelevision, and Skelevator, which acts as a quick-change costume booth and appears to exist in a dimension between space and time. Oh, and there's Ghost Buggy Jr., who comes fully equipped with the ability to talk like Kit, transform like Optimus Prime, and travel through time like a DeLorean. It is one of the most powerful inventions, nay, beings in existence, and they probably could have explored that a little more in the show itself. Kong, Spencer, Tracy, and all of their ghost-nabbing gadgets are going to be needed to fight back against the trans-dimensional time-traveling powers of Primeval and his horde of evil witches, monsters, pirates, and futuristic, skeleton robots. Hopefully they all fall under the category of ghost, otherwise it's going to be a tough task for these Ghostbusters. Lou Scheimer and Hal Sutherland began working together making cartoons in 1957. In 1962, along with Norm Prescott, they founded their own animation studio called Filmation, a portmanteau of the words film and animation. After their first big job, an animated sequel to 1939's Wizard of Oz called Journey Back to Oz ran into budget-related production delays. They focused on producing animation for television. But money was always an issue, and when things were starting to look grim on the verge of closure, Filmation was saved by the most powerful man in the universe, Superman. The New Adventures of Superman debuted in September of 1966 and was a huge hit. It established Filmation's budget-friendly style of animation that relied heavily on reused stock sequences or character movements. Superman's success helped open doors to other projects through the 60s like Superboy, the Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure, the Archie Show, the Batman Superman Hour, The Adventures of Batman, the Archie Comic Hour, and the Hardy Boys. That success continued through the 70s with dozens of animated series like Fat Albert, as well as the Emmy Award-winning Star Trek The Animated Series sequel to the original Star Trek live-action television series. At the same time, they produced live-action television shows like Shazam, The Secrets of Isis, and The Ghostbusters. The Ghostbusters was a live-action CBS Saturday morning series produced by Filmation that starred Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch, formerly of the television series F Troop. 15 22-minute episodes ran over one season from September to December 1975. The Ghostbusters are human partners Kong and Spencer working alongside their man-in-suit gorilla teammate named Tracy, played by Bob Burns. Yes, it would make sense if the gorilla was named Kong. No, I do not know why they assigned the names the way they did. Each week, under the guise of a paranormal investigation service, the Ghostbusters encountered a ghost or monster or creature that they would exchange hijinks with in a sort of live-action but sillier Scooby-Doo type adventure. The supernatural creatures would be dispensed by the Ghostbusters at the end of every episode, using a variety of scratch-built ghost-busting devices like the Dematerializer. Despite being Filmation's second highest-rated show behind another Filmation live-action series, the Shazam ISIS Hour, the Ghostbusters was canceled after one season and absolutely forgotten about for nearly a decade. In 1983, Columbia Pictures began production on a movie called Ghostbusters, written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, about a group of paranormal investigators in New York City using various devices to trap ghosts. Columbia set a release date of June 1984 and hurried into production because a year isn't as much time to make a movie as you might think, especially one with all the visual effects that Ghostbusters required. Filmation executive Lou Scheimer found out about Columbia's Ghostbusters while reading a trade magazine. As he put it in a 2007 interview, quote, "I read it in the trades. I can't remember which trade it was. I said, that's ridiculous. That's our show. That's our premise. That's our concept." Now, the exact timeline of the events is a little blurry because things were happening so fast. So we reached out to Filmation historian James Eatock from the Serial Geek TV YouTube channel for some assistance and combined his reports with those from a 2014 Vanity Fair article about the making of the movie Ghostbusters. Filmation deployed their lawyers to find out what was going on with Ghostbusters and to see how Filmation could be financially accommodated if Columbia intended to proceed. Turns out Ghostbusters was shooting in New York City right up the street from Filmation's offices. First step, Filmation issued a cease and desist for the name Ghostbusters. As we understand it, Ghostbusters associate producer Joe Medjuk was on set when he received notice that there was a problem with the name being used in the film. Medjuk implored Columbia's legal team to clear the name as soon as possible because they had already spent so much money shooting scenes that had the Ghostbusters name prominently featured, and it would be a fatal blow to reshoot so late in the game. According to Eatock, Columbia executives Lou Scheimer and various attorneys attempted to hash out the details. Columbia stood their ground, saying they didn't see an issue with the name because they were making a live-action film, not a cartoon. Scheimer corrected Columbia's misunderstanding about the original 1975 Ghostbusters TV series. While Filmation was known for their animation, the series was, in fact, live-action. Furthermore, the name and the associated premise were too similar, regardless of the execution.
Everybody's so creative!
Ghostbusters the movie proceeded in the face of Filmation's legal action, released in 1984 and raked in ticket and licensed merchandise sales. Filmation, in turn, sued Columbia. They eventually settled the matter, allowing Columbia to use the name Ghostbusters for around $500,000 and 1% of the total profits from the Ghostbusters box office. Scheimer has admitted that he made two mistakes in the negotiations. One, the 1% of box office was equal to exactly jack and shit thanks to clever Hollywood accounting that makes $300 million look like a movie with a $25 million budget broke even. And two, Scheimer never insisted on exclusive animation rights. According to Scheimer, after the movie was released and the rights issue was resolved, he suggested to Filmation's parent company, Westinghouse, that Filmation should adapt the movie as an animated series. The executives at Westinghouse disagreed, saying they didn't think they needed to license anything from Columbia because they already had their own Ghostbusters concept they could use for free. After all, they had done Ghostbusters first. Scheimer knew that was a bad idea, saying in that 2007 interview, quote, "I think we need Columbia, because they'll have one, we'll have one, and nobody will know what's going on." And as it turned out, that's essentially what happened.
It's false. No way. Not this time. Not this time. No, pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. Not this time. It never happened. No way. We got you. Not a chance.
Filmation started production on Ghostbusters, an animated sequel to their 1975 live-action series, The Ghostbusters. As soon as Columbia heard about Filmation making their show, they reached out to Daicon Enterprises and asked them to start working on their own direct animated adaptation of the movie, Ghostbusters.
Hey kids, it's time to play Bust the Baddies and Win the Goodies. Here comes the game's daddy. It's Rada.
After you've busted all 5 baddies, send your list to this address. That's Ghostbusters, Box 1100, New York, New York 10150. You could win a computer from Computerland, or a Ghost Command Funhouse, or Ghost Buggy from Shopper Toys.
Bust the baddies and win the goodies. Keep watching Channel 11.
Contest ends October 31st.
Filmation's Ghostbusters had a small but distinguished cast that included Pat Fraley as the voices of Jake Kong Jr., Jake Kong Sr., Ghost Buggy Jr., the Skelescope, and Robot Skeleton Scared Stiff, Peter Optimus Prime Cullen as Eddie Spencer Jr., Eddie Spencer Sr., Bratterat the Haunter, Floatsart, Big Evil, and Corpulon. Skeletor voice actor Alan Oppenheimer played Primeval, Fangster, Long John Scarecrow, and more. Susan Blue, known for her prolific voice acting in the role of Amanda Shepard in Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood.
You're not just a lousy doctor. You're a f***ing coward!
Played Belfry, Futura, Jessica Rae, and Time Hopper. Linda Gary, better known as Tila Evelyn in The Sorceress from Masters of the Universe, played Madam Y, Mysteria, and more. Lou Scheimer, as he frequently did on Filmation Productions, contributed several voices. He's all the gorilla noises for Tracy the Gorilla, and voices for Ansabone, Skelevision, Sir Trancelot, and a bunch of others. Both Ghostbusters cartoons were produced at the same time. They each designed toys and made deals with retail partners. The race to be first to air on television was ultimately won by Filmation, whose debut episode aired September 8, 1986, just 5 days before Columbia's The Real Ghostbusters on September 13th, so named because of... Even if you've never heard of the original The Ghostbusters live-action TV series, the unrelated movie, and the subsequent dueling animated series, you probably don't need me to explain that there was brand confusion. As someone who was there, I can tell you that when the Filmation version came on with a gorilla and a talking, time-traveling, transforming car, I had the same reaction as every other kid who had seen the movie. What the f*** is this? And how are they getting away with it? In 1986, no one knew about the 1975 live-action television series. Long before the internet or even the proliferation of home video cassettes, the only way something like that would have made it into public consciousness would have been on a show like Entertainment Tonight, and no 10-year-old anywhere was watching that.
I was.
It was very clear very quickly that Lou Scheimer was right and that it was a total mistake to even try to stand in front of the tidal wave that was the real Ghostbusters phenomenon. Filmation Ghostbusters quickly burned through their 65 episodes and retired after one season, dematerialized into obscurity, just like the original. Filmation, makers of the Masters of the Universe and She-Ra Princess of Power animated series, had long since figured out the marketing synergy, tying toys and cartoons together, each promoting the other. A comprehensive line of Ghostbusters toys was made by the now-defunct Shaper Toys. Each of the main characters were represented: Jake Jr. and Eddie Jr., Tracy the Gorilla, journalist Jessica Rae, Primeval, Scared Stiff, Haunter, Futura, Mysteria, Fangster, and Fibface. There were multiple vehicles, including the Ghostbusters Ghost Buggy, Primeval's Bone Troller, the Time Hopper, and the Scare Scooter. Shaper even rolled out a playset version of Ghost Command, an elaborate, highly detailed, enormous playset to rival Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, or yeah, Kenner's Real Ghostbusters Firehouse. If you missed it the first time around, Ghostbusters was released in its entirety on DVD in 2007. It's not available on any of the streaming sites for purchase or rental, but you can watch the entire series on Retrobytes here on YouTube. It was also released on VHS in 1989, which is important to note for this particular property because it also happens to be hilarious. And it's not because it has the same name as another pop culture franchise. According to multiple news reports, some of the tapes featured an unintended bonus segment after the Ghostbusters cartoons. The Santa Cruz Sentinel reported on Wednesday, December 27, 1989 that, quote, on Christmas Day, Mom left her 3- and 4-year-old boys in their bedroom watching a new cartoon video she'd bought them for the holidays, Filmation's Ghostbusters. A few hours later, she realized the kids were still watching the same cartoon, so she asked her husband to check on them. He found the boys watching a hardcore porno movie. They sent the kids off to another room and rewound the tape to find that the segment titled Squeal of Fortune started right after the cartoons ended and lasted about 10 minutes. Mom, who asked that her name be withheld from the article, told the Santa Cruz Sentinel that, quote, it's Christmas Day and the kids are watching X-rated movies. I'm really mad. They didn't know what they were watching, but they watched it twice. The VHS tapes were distributed by Celebrity Home Entertainment as part of their Just for Kids line. They blamed the company they subcontracted to for cutting costs by reusing old cassettes instead of new blank cassettes, and didn't do the math to make sure that all of the porn would be dematerialized by ghostbusting. Celebrity Home Entertainment immediately recalled tens of thousands of copies of Ghostbusters from store shelves and checked the master tapes to make sure they were clean. But they weren't sure exactly how many tapes made it into the wild with porn on them.
Someone call the police!
Yeah, that's one idea. Or we could work as a team, find out whoever did this and punish him ourselves. Maybe take his bare butt out of his costume and spank him. Maybe you could do it, sir.
Needless to say, they, as a company, were very embarrassed by the incident. They offered replacement tapes for everyone who wanted one. In exchange for a 1-hour tape with porn on it, you could get a 2-hour tape with no porn on it. According to the Abilene Reporter News on November 30th, 1990, a full year after the incident in Santa Cruz, a Texas grandmother filed a lawsuit after experiencing a similar pornographic home invasion. A judge issued a restraining order prohibiting the toy store who sold her the tape from promoting the tape as fully animated and just for kids, because of the live-action porn. This story included the detail that the specific tape was titled Spirit Spooks and Specters, just FYI, and that the footage was grainy. From the article, quote, "This consumer found to her dismay, and after her grandchildren had viewed the film several times, that the film contains almost 10 minutes of sexually explicit scenes at the end of the feature presentation." Even after a full year, consumer protection groups were worried that more tapes were still out there, and they might end up in the hands of young children, especially at Christmas time when home video sales increased. Another victim from Massachusetts said that her little boy was upset after watching the tape and that she, quote, quickly pulled it out of the VCR and explained that the Ghostbusters are not like that, and that the film was broken and she had to return it. We here at Secret Galaxy consider it our duty to report the full story. We ask the same questions you would ask. We knew what Ghostbusters was, but we had never heard of Squeal of Fortune, so we put our crack investigative team to work to find out. For journalism. For history. Turns out that Squeal of Fortune isn't the name of a movie, it's the name of a chapter on a longer, feature. A themed collection, if you will, of associated shorts on a 1988 tape called with other shorts like and another easily solved mystery, easily solved. Unrelated to that, James Eatock assured us that Lou Scheimer absolutely regretted the success of Columbia's movie Ghostbusters because the lack of Filmation's involvement at any level allowed Columbia to take the name as their own into the future, especially after Filmation was shut down by Westinghouse in February of 1989 and their library sold to a consortium owned by cosmetics giant L'Oreal. While Columbia's Ghostbusters went on to have a long-running animated series through 1991, another series called Extreme Ghostbusters in 1997, multiple cinematic sequels, several beloved podcasts, comics, video games, toys, mountains of licensed merchandise. Heck, as of this video, there's another Ghostbusters HasLab either just announced or about to be. Filmation's missed opportunity to capitalize on Ghostbusters as a concept and as a brand is the perfect illustration of a phenomenon that occurs thousands of times a day, every single day. It's that being first doesn't always mean being best, especially if you don't have anything interesting to say beyond the fact that you were first. A historic advertising campaign with results that raised the bar for pizza delivery expectations, fronted by a character that would become synonymous with the brand, forever intertwined with a tragedy that no one could have predicted. That was ultimately unavoidable. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Domino's Pizzas, the Noid, in 30 minutes or less. Noid is a brand character that first appeared in 1986, a rare case of a villain becoming a pseudo-spokesperson for a brand. Domino's built its empire of delivery dominance on the association with their drivers as the heroes, fighting back against the Noid's supervillain level of obsession with destroying their pizza. Domino's Pizza began as Dominic's Pizza in Ypsilanti, Michigan. In 1960, Dominic's was purchased by Tom and James Monahan. They paid $900 for the business, which at the time wasn't doing that great, and a year later wasn't showing any signs of improvement. James gave his half of the business to Tom in exchange for the Volkswagen Beetle they used for making deliveries and recommitted to his job as a postal worker. By 1965, Tom successfully turned things around and the business grew to 3 locations. That same year, one of his employees suggested that perhaps Domino's Pizza was a better name than Dominic's, and Tom agreed. Their logo commemorates those first 3 restaurants as the dots on the Domino's. By 1983, Domino's had expanded to 1,000 locations. However, they were still on the outside looking in compared to the giants in the pizza industry. Pizza Hut was the literal go-to place for pizza, the king of restaurant pizza dining. The economy of pizza was changing. Families where both parents worked were increasingly common. A formal, fully prepared dinner wasn't always possible. A family night out was shifting to a family night in as VCRs kept people at home watching movies or rewatching their favorite shows. Domino's needed to find a way to distinguish themselves from the field. In 1984, they planted their flag. Pizza delivered to your house, hot and fresh, in 30 minutes or less. Sure, every pizza restaurant aspired to 30 minutes or less, but to actually promise it, to say it out loud and offer a money-back guarantee, that put a lot of pressure on Domino's and their drivers, but even more on the competition to match them. Timeliness in delivery wasn't the only issue people had with getting their pizza delivered. Sometimes a delivery driver might have to make multiple stops. The longer it takes, the more likely the pizza gets cold. Sometimes the driver was careless about the way the pizza sat in the car. It flipped over, the cheese got stuck to the box. Maybe it slid and got all squished up. Maybe the driver liked to smoke as they make their deliveries. Even if it arrived in 30 minutes, there were dozens of other things that could go wrong. Things that never would happen in the physical restaurant where the experience was controlled by the business, where there were fewer variables to account for. To help educate customers as to what they should be expecting, no, demanding from their pizza delivery experience, Domino's embarked on a new promotional campaign, targeted not at what they were doing right, but what everyone else was doing wrong. Group 243 was the advertising agency that worked with Domino's on the campaign. As they considered what the new concept could be, a suggestion was made that they center it around a bad guy. Executive Vice President and Creative Director of the campaign, Ernie Parrish, loved the idea. But they needed a clever name. At the time, employees of Domino's referred to themselves as Dominoids, a cute, in-house, self-imposed nickname. That was shortened to Noid, and it stuck. As Parrish tells the story in an interview with NPR's The World in 2018, the Noid quickly became the personification of everything that could go wrong with pizza delivery. He was an avatar for all that was bad and wrong and stressful and what Domino's was fighting against. He was their own Wile E. Coyote. The next step was to bring the Noid to life by employing an agency that had proven success. In 1986, Will Vinton Studios delivered one of the biggest advertising campaigns in the history of humankind. The California Raisins were an overnight pop culture phenomenon that transcended their mission to increase raisin sales and consumption. Will Vinton Studios started working with clay as an animation medium in the early 1970s. They gained national notoriety in 1975 with Closed Mondays, a project that won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. By 1985, they had produced visual effects for film and television, music videos, commercials, and a feature-length film called The Adventures of Mark Twain, which Vinton has described as adult, but not X-rated. 1986's California Raisins further cemented the studio as both the primary stewards of the art form and its undisputed masters. Parrish loved the look and feel of claymation. He wanted to bring that aesthetic to Domino's and the Noid. As someone who was 10 years old at the time, I can tell you that claymation was more exciting than anything computer-generated imagery has accomplished in the 3 decades since its mainstream media embrace, and that includes those dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. I'll take the ones in 1987's Will Vinton's Claymation Christmas Celebration, thank you very much. Parrish reached out to Will Vinton Studios and gave them the pitch. Domino's needed some kind of impish troll or goblin, a kind of mischievous gremlin or hooligan, a character whose sole purpose is to freeze, smash, blast, crush, soak, somehow render a pizza inedible.
Put a bird on it!
Barry Bruce designed the iconic red spandex one-piece bodysuit with the rabbit ears and Noid symbol on his chest, as ideal a realization as Domino's could have hoped for, perfectly suited for animated exploits. The campaign established the Noid as a representation of things that annoyed customers about other pizza delivery experiences. The spots challenged them to avoid the Noid and get your pizza in 30 minutes or less, exclusively from Domino's.
This is the Noid. He loves to ruin your pizza. If you've ever gotten cold pizza, or squashed pizza, or pizza that just wasn't right, the Noid did it. But at Domino's Pizza, we avoid the Noid. So when you want hot, delicious quality pizza delivered in less than 30 minutes, Domino's Pizza delivers. One call does it all.
The Noid's laughter and various pizza-griefed mumblings were voiced by Pons Maar, who previously played the lead wheeler in 1985's Return to Oz, a movie that Will Vinton Studios provided visual effects for. Narration was usually voiced by Andre Stoka, the longtime voice of Owl in Disney's Winnie the Pooh franchise, and a whole lot of other stuff. Through the mid-1980s, the campaign propelled Domino's past entrenched pizza empires. Pizza Hut saw their lead in the industry shrink as Domino's ate their lunch and dinner in the home delivery market. Domino's accounted for $1 billion in total sales, second only to Pizza Hut's $2 billion. At the time, home delivery was around a quarter of the total $8 billion market. That was expected to grow to over a third by 1990. The Noid campaign successfully positioned Domino's as the prime beneficiary of that growth through the 80s and beyond. The Noid commercials overperformed by any reasonable metric, not just achieving the goal of greater exposure for Domino's and their 30 minutes or less guarantee. Yeah, it did that just fine, but the Noid quickly became a merchandising opportunity in and of itself, an unexpected source of revenue for Domino's. Customers demanded stuff. Some kids made their parents commit to ordering Domino's at least once a week until they were able to collect the entire set of Noid PVC figures.
Please, Dad, when you call to order, make sure you clarify which figures we still need.
Hats, clothes, buttons, toys. In 1989, California Merchandising Concepts released the Avoid the Noid game for DOS. As we sit here in 2023, think of it as a reflection of the times, the fervor for anything Noid related, not so much as the best attempt at making a game. Players take on the role of a Domino's employee attempting to deliver pizzas while avoiding the Noid and his various attempts to thwart your duties. If you lose 5 pizzas, the Noid claims victory and the game is over. If you missed it when it was released, you can still find emulators online if you just want to be able to say that you played the thing. In 1990, Capcom reskinned a game called Kamen no Ninja Hanamaru into Yo Noid for the Nintendo Entertainment System. As a reskinned game, it retained most of the properties of the original game, making it more challenging than CMC's Avoid the Noid, but no more impactful to the genre. This time you control the Noid himself on a quest through New York City to square off against another Noid, but green. In 1988, CBS was this close to airing a Noid Saturday morning cartoon. It never made it through production as it was deemed to be a little too close to a 22-minute commercial aimed at kids, an approach that had been successful for the majority of the decade but was increasingly frowned upon. The incredible momentum and pop culture influence began to subside in 1989 when Domino's was confronted with a reality that they could not possibly have predicted. What had been a successful marketing campaign built around a made-up word and animated character of a human called a Noid turned out to be the same as a surname of Swedish origin shared by people around the world. On January 30th, 1989, a man named Kenneth Lamar Noid walked into a Domino's location in Chamblee, Georgia with a handgun and demanded $100,000. He claimed that the Domino's Avoid the Noid campaign had unfairly targeted him, stolen his name, and he expected restitution, firing 2 shots into the air to prove he was serious. He wanted to speak to Tom Monahan, the owner of Domino's, and threatened to kill the employees if the police showed up. He demanded a getaway vehicle and a copy of Robert Anton Wilson's 1985 novel, The Widow's Son. After a 5-hour standoff, the employees were able to escape when Noid put the gun down to eat the pizza he demanded they make for him. With no leverage, Noid surrendered to police sometime thereafter. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Kenneth Noid was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent time at Georgia's Mental Health Institute. Domino's leadership had a meeting to discuss whether or not they were in any way responsible for this incident. They concluded that no reasonable person would blame them for what occurred. Domino's continued to use the Noid in commercials through 1991. After nearly 5 years in use, the campaign had run its course. The pizza market landscape had drastically shifted and the Noid's services were no longer required. In 1993, after multiple delivery driver accidents resulted in multi-million-dollar payouts, Domino's ended the 30 minutes or less guarantee as well. 2 years later, in 1995, Kenneth Lamar Noid took his own life. And while to this day many still point to Kenneth's suicide as the reason Domino's discontinued the Noid campaign, Parrish and others at Domino's maintain that the suicide happened years after and was not a factor in their decision to end the campaign. The Noid campaign began in 1986. The Chamblee hostage incident occurred in 1989. Parrish says the Noid campaign was retired at the end of 1991. Kenneth took his own life 4 years later in 1995. From there, Domino's rolled out a variety of other marketing campaigns and brand characters, none having the same kind of business or pop culture impact as the Noid. In 2009, Domino's tapped the well of nostalgia for a limited run of promotional t-shirts foreshadowing the return of the Noid on Facebook in 2011, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the campaign. Included in the week-long festivities was a Facebook game called Domino's Noid Super Shootout, which, in retrospect, was not the best name for the game.
Look, it's a Noid. Avoid the Noid. He ruins pizzas.
The Noid is a pop culture reference point. It has been name-checked on shows like Family Guy, 30 Rock, and The Simpsons. He showed up briefly in 2016 for the 30th anniversary and again most recently in 2021 as part of a multimedia marketing campaign that peaked with a cameo appearance in the Crash Bandicoot on the Run mobile game. And since we live in a hell of our own creation, 2021 also introduced Noid NFTs, which brings us back to the point of the Noid in the first place: avoiding him. The Noid was a brilliantly constructed brand character that allowed Domino's to tell a story about their product, their competitors, and the industry in precisely the manner that would convince customers that they were the best solution for the problem, promising and delivering satisfaction in a way that left everyone else scrambling to keep up. The Noid drafted on the popularity of one of the most successful and identifiable television campaigns by adopting the same distinct visual aesthetic of the California Raisins, who themselves were still on an upward trajectory, both boosted by the application of claymation, an art form that creators Will Vinton Studios literally defined and trademarked. Despite a tragedy beyond Domino's control, the Noid remains an iconic character in the pantheon of animated television brand representatives to a generation that was raised on advertising as entertainment. Raised on the lesson that delivery pizza should never be frozen, wet, crushed, or blasted by lasers. Long before Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse demonstrated the potential danger of cross-dimensional breaches, there was a real-world example of an alternate reality interpretation of Spider-Man bleeding into our universe. It was a 41-episode what-if experiment that also established the final piece of what would become one of the most popular television genres in Japan and ultimately around the world. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Toei's Spider-Man. Up front, I want to say gomen nasai. I'm sorry for getting any and or all of the pronunciations wrong in this video. There's quite a few Japanese names and stuff, and I am not properly trained in the Japanese language. Watashi wa YouTube no hito desu. Japanese Spider-Man, also known as Supaidaman, a phonetic interpretation of the name Spider-Man in the alphabet of the Japanese language, is a 41-episode live-action television series that ran from March of 1978 to March of 1979. It is a loose interpretation of the Marvel Comics character that borrows the costume and basic powers, but takes a whole lot of creative license with the rest of his story. In this version of Spider-Man, an alien named Garia crash lands on Earth. His ship, the Marveler, is discovered by Takuya Yamashiro, a 22-year-old motocross racer. Garia gives some of his blood to Takuya, which grants him superpowers since Garia happens to be a great warrior from the planet Spider. He was on the hunt for Professor Monster and the Iron Cross Army, who, by the way, destroyed Planet Spider and left him as the only surviving warrior. Garia also gives Takuya a mechanism to activate his costume, his webbing, and summon the Marveler, which, by the way, also transforms into a giant mech super robot, or for you Americans, a Zord called Leopardon. Along with the Spider Protector costume, the Spider Machine GP7, and the capacity to summon the Marveler, Takuya now has a spider sense which alerts him to the nearby dangers of the Iron Cross Army. Garia's blood has given him superhuman strength, speed, agility, and the ability to climb walls. Like Peter Parker, Takuya keeps his identity secret to protect his friends and family until he begins cooperating with Juzo Mamaya and the Interpol Secret Intelligence Division. Luckily for Takuya, the ISID is also pretty good at keeping secrets. This Spider-Man occupies an interesting hybrid space in pop culture, being simultaneously a distinctly American and Japanese creation. At the same time, he also bridges the genres of tokusatsu and sentai on Japanese television. Tokusatsu is a genre of television and film entertainment, not to be confused with Tokataku, the Japanese toy company, or To Go Tacos, which is what I had for lunch. Tokusatsu literally means special effects, but it has come to represent the entire spectrum of live-action costume superheroes, crime fighters, robots, and monsters. The term tokusatsu can be applied to all types of entertainment, going all the way back to and including kabuki theater. But the modern usage really gets going with Godzilla in 1954. Ultraman in 1966, Giant Robo in 1967, and Kamen Rider in 1971, all examples of tokusatsu programs. Even Go Ranger in 1975, which, upon its creation, establishes the tokusatsu subgenre called Sentai. Sentai literally means team, or squadron, or force, and generally focuses on superhero teams. It's the subgenre that years later would become Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in America. After Go Ranger in 1975 and Jakka in 1977, Spider-Man arrived in 1978 with all the bug-centric visuals of the Kamen Rider series and the superheroics of the Sentai series, merging the aesthetics of both and adding a giant super robot as his key finishing move, not to mention a valuable asset on toy shelves, and it was all the result of a 3-year licensing agreement between Marvel Comics and Toei. Toei has been producing movies, television, and video games since 1951. Marvel Comics has been doing the same name since 1939. The team-up initiated a 3-year period where they had the option to use each other's intellectual properties. Initially, Toei planned a version of Spider-Man that was kind of like a reverse Spider-Verse concept. The Spider-Man would literally be teamed up with a character named Yamato Takeru, a warrior prince from the 1st century who had time-traveled into the present. Spider-Man would have been his sidekick. But Toei decided not to take any chances. Spider-Man was a top-tier feature character and they had the license, so why not build a show around him specifically? Spider-Man, Leopardon and all, was a success, and for the follow-up, Toei was going to produce a show about Captain America, or at least a Japanese counterpart of Captain America. They pulled the ship back a little closer to the Sentai team concept, expanded the roster back to 5, included representation from around the world, added a transforming robot, and released Battle Fever J in 1979, officially giving birth to the Super Sentai genre as it is known today. Toei, in cooperation with Marvel, would release 2 more Super Sentai shows, Denshi Sentai Denziman in 1980 and Taiyo Sentai Sun Vulcan in 1981.
あれなんだ車持ち上げちゃうのどんどん登るねこれは秘密メカだって雲ミサイルアクションいっぱいスパイダーマン発売中
Meanwhile, back in the US, Marvel had utilized Combatra V and Danguard Ace in their line of comics supporting Mattel's Shogun Warriors toy line in 1979. But Stan Lee loved what he was seeing with the live-action superhero shows that Toei was producing and set out to find a network, any network, that would run them. Marvel pitched it. They pitched a concept featuring the greatest Super Sentai show ever, My Son Vulcan. It would be easy and cost-efficient to redub the audio with English-speaking voice actors, reshoot the out-of-costume parts, and churn out episodes that were coming in from Japan 30% complete. It was an idea exactly 1 decade too early, as Bandai would execute the trick and stick the landing with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in 1993. And now, since those characters were actually Toei creations, now I'm never gonna get to see my sweet eagle, shark, and panther as part of Hasbro's Lightning collection. Where's the justice? Toei took a lot of liberties with Spider-Man. Ultimately, legend has it that Stan Lee himself was a big fan of the show. He loved the action, the theater, the way the character moved.
It was very good. I enjoyed it. And it was so different than the way we do them in the United States that it was fun, because I was looking at a totally different style, and a good style.
But Stan Lee isn't necessarily Marvel. Marvel wasn't crazy about the idea of Spider-Man piloting a giant robot, but relented when they were shown the potential to reach their desired audience and make a lot of money selling toys. Leopardon toys were included in the Chogokin line of transforming robots and vehicles. And it worked. Kids loved that Leopardon and by default Spider-Man. It boosted the show and ratings and assured Toei that going forward, they would be stupid not to include giant robots in their live-action superhero shows for kids. Leopardon the toy would complete the circle, coming back to America as part of Bandai America's Daicon line in 1984. Heavy-handedly described on the package as a robot that is half leopard and a space-age tank too. Do me a favor, put that on my tombstone. Spider-Man helped create the toy-centric superhero genre of television movies on both sides of the Pacific, but if you were looking for episodes of the show prior to 2005, you were out of luck. Spider-Man was owned by Marvel, so Toei couldn't release a collection with him in it. One VHS cassette released in the 80s had the first episode, the 31st episode, and a short film edit that had run in theaters. Toei wasn't even allowed to use photographs of Spider-Man without paying additional licensing rights to Marvel once that agreement had ended. In 2005, Toei reacquired the rights to distribute the series and in December released a DVD set in Japan featuring all 41 episodes. In 2006, Bandai included Leopardon in their Soul of Chogokin line, which revisits classic Chogokin toys with modern engineering, design, and functionality. It even included a scale Spider-Man and his GP7 Spider Machine. In 2009, Marvel began its slow embrace of the character. From March to December of that year, they released a new episode online each week until the entire series was available with original audio and English subtitles. They have since been removed. And it's this internet, this World Wide Web, that the rest of us have to thank for our knowledge of the character at all. Japanese Spider-Man is one of those things that has gained prominence and mass appeal internationally through accessibility. In the past, it disappeared into obscurity. Now, today, nothing disappears into obscurity. In 2014, Marvel went all in. They fully embraced Takuya Yamashiro and Leopardon, prominently featuring both in the Spider-Verse crossover series. It was the series that inspired the 2018 hit film This Spider-Man. Toei Spider-Man was now officially part of Marvel Universe canon. There's nothing too obscure for the internet, and nothing escapes an online petition. After the success of Into the Spider-Verse, fans began lobbying the creators to include Toei's Spider-Man in the sequel. Executive producer and writer Phil Lord suggested that if Into the Spider-Verse made it to $200 million, he would include Japanese Spider-Man in the sequel. As of this video, Into the Spider-Verse has only done $190 million domestic and $375 million worldwide, so I don't know if that counts. Can we get Phil on the phone, see if he can get some clarification? But it was recently pointed out that Leopardon does kind of appear in the first movie as a rough sketch in Miles Morales' sketchbook. It's a concept too cool not to attempt to exploit, and Toei has no reason not to play along with Sony to get it done. Takuya Yamashiro's most recent appearance was as a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. Mattel produced a special edition Hot Wheels GP7 Spider Machine with box art featuring Toei's Spider-Man, which certainly makes it seem like Japanese Spider-Man is on his way back in one form or another. Toei's Spider-Man's legacy is one of cross-cultural marketing, a core influence on an entire genre of international superhero television and toys, as well as a singularly unique interpretation of a character that has been around for over 50 years. No longer lost to time and legal red tape, Takuya Yamashiro could be the next household name, along with Miles Morales, janky old broke hobo Spider-Man, and Spider-Ham. A giant radioactive lizard wallowing in irrelevance returned to the big screen to reclaim his title as king of all monsters, and, more importantly, quench his thirst for untapped foreign markets and revenue streams through a nuclear-powered extreme makeover that reimagined him as a brooding, self-assured harbinger of the future in a world precariously perched on the verge of mutually assured self-destruction. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Godzilla 1985. This video is about the movie Godzilla 1985, and we'll touch on some aspects of the greater Godzilla franchise that we think are relevant to this story. But not much, because there is far too much Godzilla stuff to cover in one video. Take heart, this is our entry point, and like Godzilla, we'll keep coming back to cover the other parts over the next 50 years. Godzilla 1985 is a re-edited, localized American version of the 1984 Japanese film produced by Toho simply called Godzilla, but also called The Return of Godzilla. Adapted for the US by New World Pictures, it contains additional footage and characters not found in the original movie, like Raymond Burr reprising his role as Professor Steve Martin, and the franchise debut of Dr. Pepper. The Yahata Maru, a Japanese fishing boat, is lost in a terrible storm 100 miles south of Tokyo. The following day, intrepid journalist Goro Maki finds the vessel adrift. All aboard dead, except for some giant mutant sea lice and Hiroshi Ken Okamura, who saves him from the giant mutant sea lice. Ken tells Maki that the island the Yahata Maru nearly ran aground on was the resting place of Godzilla, who, after 30 years, has returned. Maki attempts to file the story with his newspaper, but the report is squashed. If word about Godzilla gets out, it could cause a global panic. The Japanese government is moving quickly to silence anyone from talking about the incident as they develop a plan to deal with the impending return of Godzilla, the most destructive natural force the world has ever known. But their plans are also squashed when Godzilla destroys a Russian nuclear submarine. The Russians are blaming the Americans, and the two nuclear superpowers begin to posture. Japan is forced to reveal that the Americans are innocent and that the world must come together to deal with the threat of Godzilla by any means necessary, except nuclear weapons. But how do you stop an indestructible 300-foot-tall radioactive fire-breathing supermonster? What could possibly convince him to reconsider the destruction of property, lives, and valuable shoreline real estate? If the world can't find a way to defeat Godzilla, then the world as we know it is doomed. Godzilla got his start in 1954's Godzilla from Japanese movie studio Toho Company, produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka, directed by Ishiru Honda. A film that, on its surface, was about a giant radioactive dinosaur monster awakened from his slumber by hydrogen bomb testing, wreaking havoc on Japan and terrorizing the fishing industry by hogging the supply. He was a menace! A slightly deeper exploration of the themes in the context of the film reveals a warning to all humanity about the dangers of modern military science, pushing the boundaries of what humans know about the natural world and its weaponization motivated by profit and power. A suggestion that there are things we should not know, as we are hilariously unprepared to deal with the responsibility of that knowledge. Despite its similarity to an entire genre of atomic age-inspired giant monster films at the time, Godzilla rose above the herd to become a pop culture icon in Japan. It kicked off a series of Godzilla films, television shows, and licensed merchandise produced over subsequent decades that reached beyond Japan into international markets. Godzilla was heavily re-edited and localized for the American audience 2 years later in 1956 with a new title, Godzilla King of the Monsters. It was shorter than the Japanese version, omitted the bulk of political themes, and featured new footage produced by Jewel Enterprises that starred Raymond Burr as reporter Steve Martin. Not that Steve Martin, covering the events as if he were always a part of the movie. Whatever the Jewel Enterprises version did to alter the message of the original film was inconsequential with respect to what it did for the franchise in the US. It succeeded in introducing the character to the American audience, establishing Godzilla as a movie and future television star, and Toho as a legitimate competitor in the US for ticket sales. No pop culture franchise lasts forever. Hey, we'll see, but so far that's an accurate statement. The ones that have lasted the longest, history has shown, have had to reinvent themselves to stay relevant as the material grows stale and the audience grows old. Godzilla was one of the first of his kind to recognize this at several levels and adapt. By the end of the 1970s, nearly 20 years after it was created, the character and franchise had become banal, repetitive, predictable Saturday morning children's fare. Godzilla was a liability. Many of the people responsible for the original film, the thing that put him on the map in the first place, were gone, deceased, or moved on to other projects. The more time that passed after World War II, the less the fears of the atomic age resonated with viewers. Godzilla was now a children's superhero, clearly an actor in a rubber suit, fighting against other actors in rubber suits in a televised kaiju wrestling federation with all the kayfabe that a 6-year-old could indulge in. Toho reached a point where they needed to save themselves from Godzilla, a point where they needed to save Godzilla from themselves. After a few premature attempts were abandoned, original 1954 Godzilla producer Tomoyuki Tanaka told everyone else to get out of the way as he took back the reins of the franchise. In 1979, ahead of the 25th anniversary of 1954's Godzilla, he intended to reach back to the things that made Godzilla so popular in Japan in the first place. The impending doom, the monster as an elemental machine of destruction, the historical relevance. Because, as fate would have it, fears of the nuclear age were dominating the public consciousness after the March 1979 partial meltdown of a reactor at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania in the United States, not to mention the escalating tensions of the Cold War between global nuclear superpowers US and Russia. What better time for the return of the living, fire-breathing portent of the apocalypse? Giant monsters and science fiction horror were experiencing a bit of a renaissance at the time. Tanaka was emboldened by the success of movies like 1976's King Kong and 1979's Alien. However, a 1980 script called The Resurrection of Godzilla was turned down by Toho due to budget concerns. In 1983, Toho signed off on a second film based in the US led by director Steve Miner. That project was ultimately doomed by its own hubris as Miner insisted on budget-busting stop-motion animation and 3D projection. Tanaka, backed by the support of legions of Godzilla fans, drew a line and began producing a proper sequel to the 1954 film explicitly for the Japanese audience, ignoring everything that came after it up to and including the 1978-1979 American-produced Hanna-Barbera Godzilla cartoon. They would have Godzuki no more. The script was written by Shuichi Nagahara, who included some of the elements introduced in Miner's unproduced 3D film. It was directed by Koji Hashimoto after the director of the 1954 film, Ishiro Honda, declined. Godzilla, or also referred to as The Return of Godzilla, is a full reboot of the franchise that picks up immediately 30 years after the events of the 1954 film. It opened in Japan in December of 1984, bringing in around $14 million against a budget of roughly $6 million, successfully kicking off a new era of Godzilla movies and merchandise in Japan. In 1985, Toho started looking for a studio in the US to pick up the rights to The Return of Godzilla to reintroduce the big lizard to one of the most important markets on the planet. Interest was low based on the franchise's prior history in the US. Despite Toho's intention to partner with one of the prominent Hollywood studios like MGM or Universal, the best offer was from independent studio New World Pictures, the company that brought you movies like 1978's Star Crash, 1980's Battle Beyond the Stars, and 1984's Children of the Corn. Founded by Roger Corman and his brother Gene in 1970, New World Pictures had established themselves with their prodigious output of films, 18 in 1984 alone. They also had experience adapting Japanese media for the US audience. In 1975, they released Tidal Wave, an adaptation of the Japanese film Japan Sinks from 1973. In 1981, they released Galaxy Express, a re-edit and localization of Toei's animated feature, Galaxy Express 999, based on the television series of the same name. In 1984, they released Warriors of the Wind, a re-edit and localization of Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. All of those adaptations requiring a great deal of rewriting and dubbing, Tidal Wave going a step further with scenes starring Lorne Greene as an ambassador to the United Nations added to the film to help bring an American perspective to the narrative. New World tasked Tony Randall with the adaptation of Toho's Godzilla Returns. Under a tight deadline with around $2 million to work with, Randall thought it prudent to lean into the camp that the US audience would already be expecting from the franchise, redub the existing film, and supplement with some additional scenes featuring American actors. Title was changed to Godzilla 1985, the year of release, yes, but also an homage to one of Randall's favorite movies as a kid, another classic monster reintroduction, 1958's futuristic Frankenstein 1970. New World got to work writing a script for the dubbed Japanese dialogue and for the new American segments. When considering who to cast in those scenes, Lorne Greene was once again suggested, but they quickly pivoted to Raymond Burr to further connect Godzilla 1985 as a direct sequel to 1956's Godzilla King of the Monsters. Burr agreed to appear in the film, but with a few caveats. 1. His shoot time had to be limited to 8 hours. 2. No funny business. Literally. He would not participate in the new film if it didn't respect and adhere to the serious anti-nuclear war themes of the original. Burr didn't want to be in a comedy or a film that was going to treat the subject matter, the threat of nuclear destruction, as a punchline, a sentiment shared by Warren Kremmerlich, who played General Goodhue. Director R.J. Kaiser was already working for New World at the time. He was an editor on their 1981 adaptation of Galaxy Express and producer and editor on several other titles. He would be responsible for making sure that, as best as possible, the Japanese and American footage told a coherent story with a consistent tone. Godzilla 1985 took other liberties with the original film, including but not limited to shortening the runtime by 16 minutes, swapping out sound effects, some of the character names are changed, reordering scenes to increase the tension between the Russians and the Americans. Most importantly, to turn up the Cold War era appeal, the Russians are cast in a much darker light. The New World version makes it clear that the Russians intentionally launch a nuclear missile from orbit, while in the original film the Russians try and fail to stop the accidental launch. Two other additions undercut New World's attempt to maintain a somber, solemn tone. The first was the inclusion of a satirical animated short produced by Marv Newland in 1969 called Bambi Meets Godzilla. Produced while he was a student, the 90-second black and white short has been recognized by some as one of the greatest cartoons produced and has been archived by the Academy Film Archive. The short, which depicts a very brief encounter between the title characters, was shown prior to screenings of Godzilla 1985 during its initial run and on subsequent home video releases. It has absolutely nothing to do with the film itself and likely set the wrong tone for the American audience ahead of what was intended to be a more mature reintroduction of the franchise. Second, New World Pictures partnered with Dr. Pepper to promote the film across media. Dr. Pepper was investing $10 million. One of the requirements for New World was that the name of the product had to be featured in the film and at least one principal character had to be shown drinking it. Director Kaiser solved this problem by staging a Dr. Pepper vending machine at the intersection of two hallways when General Goodhue and Major McDonough are first learning about the sunken Russian sub. Right at the very beginning of the first new American scene produced, center of frame, 1-point perspective, same way Kubrick would have shot it. The second placement was much later, as the militaries of the world, the citizens of Japan, and the viewers are on the edge of their seats, hoping that the plan to lure Godzilla away from the city works. Major McDonough takes a big ol' swig from a Dr. Pepper like he's shooting an ad. It breaks the tension in all the wrong ways. As Kaiser put it in a 2021 interview with VantagePointInterviews.com, my biggest mistake in handling the whole Dr. Pepper connection was having Major McDonough take a sip from it in a shot that pans across our American principles. Just the image of the soda can served to undercut the tension and invite the audience's derision. All the Dr. Pepper references should have been kept to before Burr's character entered the war room. New World Pictures and Dr. Pepper were also trying to make sure the right people, the right demographics, knew about the movie, whether they enjoyed it for the social commentary or just wanted to dunk on the practical visual effects.
I was afraid to love you, but now I want more of you.
To that end, they produced a music video called I Was Afraid to Love You, love theme from Godzilla 1985 by Jill Elliott, because the best way to get the most exposure to the tweens and teens in the audience was to get a video on MTV. The song didn't matter, it's not even in the movie. The content of the video didn't matter, it's mostly clips from the movie. The exposure to that audience, the ones who were most likely to go see the movie, was the important part for New World Pictures, for Godzilla, and for Dr. Pepper. The Dr. Pepper promotional campaign may have played a role in setting unrealistic expectations for the film. Godzilla drinking from a giant can of Dr. Pepper in the music video and TV commercials and on printed materials certainly served to downplay his role as Mother Nature's instrument of destruction, instead depicting him as just one of the guys, using the visual language of the 1960s and 70s movies that Toho was trying so desperately to disassociate from. It suggests that there is no other way for Godzilla to be viewed in the US than through a satiric lens. No matter how serious it gets, we're still all in on the joke that Godzilla is a joke. In Japan, Return of Godzilla was a success, powering 6 more films through 1995. New World's Godzilla 1985, however, fared worse, barely earning twice its $2 million initial budget. While profitable, it did not re-establish the franchise in the US the way Toho had intended. Other than the Dr. Pepper promotion, there does not appear to have been much, if any, official Godzilla 1985 merchandise presence. Imperial produced some very simple figures among other toys, but they were all branded Godzilla King of the Monsters, harkening back to the 1956 American film. New World released Godzilla 1985 on home video in 1986. It was New World's most successful release up to that point, earning as much on home sales and rentals as the film itself had at the box office. Anchor Bay Entertainment acquired New World's library in the late 90s, then re-released both Godzilla 1985 and the original Japanese film Return of Godzilla on video again in 1997, ahead of the 1998 reboot of the US version of the franchise. After that, the rights ownership for Godzilla 1985 got murky. Toho technically owned the original film, but it was unclear who had the rights to the adaptation. In 2016, Kraken Releasing released Toho's 1984 The Return of Godzilla on DVD and Blu-ray for the first time ever. Godzilla 1985 was not included. Since then, it's been increasingly more difficult to watch Godzilla 1985, likely because Toho would prefer that you just didn't. Watch the original, Return of Godzilla, instead. Godzilla 1985 is not currently available on any streaming service, but you can watch it online if you know where to look. Let's just say that it has been archived on the internet by a .org. While they are connected at their core, cut from the same cloth, the legacy of the two films within their respective countries immediately diverges. In Japan, Return of Godzilla was a box office success, praised for its visual effects, winning a Japan Academy Award. New World's Godzilla 1985 stopped the reemergence of the franchise in the US before it even started. Roger Ebert called it a bad movie with aspirations of being a good bad movie. Toho's Return of Godzilla reinforced his status as a Japanese national icon, a monster, a villain, a hero, a cautionary tale, a victim of the modern nuclear age, living, dying, being reborn time and time again, a cycle of reinvention, an echo of the shifting tides or the changing seasons, destined to walk the earth forever, indestructible. New World Pictures attempted to import the 30-year-old franchise into the modern era, into the 80s, and re-establish the franchise for a generation that may only know Godzilla as a parody of itself. But Godzilla 1985 ultimately revealed that the best way to kill Godzilla was to make him American.
The look, the feel, the sound, the real. Entertech.
The AK Centerfire, automatic water weapon, batteries not included, with up to 30 feet of firing power. An extra clip for reloading, a shoulder strap for moving out. There's also the M16 rifle, the sidekick pistol, the RPG rocket water launcher, the AK Centerfire.
The look, the feel, the sound, so real. Entertech.